The CNA Leadership Summit 2023, presenting partner, Sing Life, a better way to financial freedom. The summit highlights how trust is the most important currency for a strong nation. Join in the conversation as leaders and distinguished speakers from public and private sectors share their views on the challenges and opportunities for building trust. Learn about how business leaders foster trust in the workplace while maintaining focus on revenue goals, and how businesses can establish and retain trust with consumers. Explore why trust matters in an ever-polarizing world. The CNA Leadership Summit 2023 on the 27th of July. Organised by Mediacorp. Impact Partner NVPC. Supported by Year of Celebrating Social Service Partners.
Hello and welcome to the CNA Leadership Summit, Trust Matters. I'm Elizabeth Neo and I present the business news on CNA's flagship morning program, Asia Fest. It's good to have you join us this Thursday afternoon on our YouTube and LinkedIn live stream. And we're broadcasting this from the Ritz-Carlton, Singapore. And our event this year looks at trust. And we like to start the conversation on the challenges and opportunities that come with building and retaining trust in the 21st century. Now, the importance of trust has become increasingly evident as the world navigates the aftermath of the global pandemic and grapples with new geopolitical challenges. Governments, institutions, and businesses, they all rely on trust, which is crucial for social unity and well-being. Now, trust directly impacts a government's ability to govern effectively, and it also plays a significant role in reducing transaction costs in any social, economic, or political relationship. Now, this summit is a platform to reflect on the trust among governments, institutions, businesses, and the general public across the region. We've got notable policymakers and business leaders joining us today, including Mr. Edwin Tong, as Singapore's Minister for Culture, Community and Youth, and Second Minister for Law. Today on our YouTube and LinkedIn live stream, we'll bring you snippets of CNA's extensive news coverage and documentaries on this topic. Public trust can be vital for a government's ability to handle health crises such as the COVID-19 pandemic. We saw clear and transparent communication needed to keep the public informed and reassured throughout the pandemic. The following news clip looks at how the Singapore government fared during the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's take a look.
Clear and transparent public communications are needed to keep Singaporeans informed and reassured throughout the pandemic. That's something that the government says it will continue to do to build trust and ensure effective response during a crisis. But it admits that some things could have been done better. For example, many struggle to keep up with the frequent changes in safe management measures.
I would say COVID-19 has been a very complex and wicked problem on a grand scale, with many twists and turns and disruptions and surprises along the way. We had to operate in a fog of war. We had to make decisions amidst conditions of incomplete information. And we had intense debates on what actions to take. And these were often not binary choices, but gradations of options with very difficult trade-offs. We made our best judgment at that time, but of course with the benefit of hindsight and what we know today, we probably could have handled certain situations differently.
One analyst says there's a need to build up communication channels, not just through national broadcasts and advertisements, but also among the people. And this will help put out reliable and accurate information and tackle the problem of misinformation and disinformation.
Ultimately, right, it is not the government that defeats the pandemic, right? It is the people working together. So I think when we look at communication, I would say that it is important for communication to be direct, honest, reliable, accurate. If there were any shortcomings or decisions that perhaps were not so well taken, and to then ratify those and to say what those measures will be.
Now that was our news clip on how the government built trust during the pandemic. And joining me now for a closer look at how we can build in a trust-driven and collaborative society is Paul Hui Jia, founder and director of SkillSeed, a Singaporean social enterprise. Hui Jia, it's good to have you on with us this afternoon. Let's talk about trust as a precious resource. PM Lee said that during the COVID-19 pandemic. Why is trust more important than ever today?
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I'm very happy to be here. So trust at SkillSeed, we liken it to be like oxygen, you know. It's invisible, it's intangible, but it's vital, right? And when it's in abundance, it can ignite collaboration, just like a fuel, because oxygen is a fuel. But when it's depleted, the consequences are drastic, right? Relationships suffocate, social fabrics disintegrate. So now more than ever, as you know, we may be aware, the word that it's being thrown around is VUCA, right? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So increasingly, we as individuals are existing in a place, in an environment where there's a lower sense of safety because things are different. We are not familiar, right? And so that makes us more vulnerable, right? So that's why trust is more important than ever now to allow us to be resistant to negative changes and be resilient to bounce back should those negative changes affect us. Yeah.
How has the concept of trust evolved given that all these, as we talked about, these uncertainties that we're seeing?
Right. So the concept of trust, I feel that, I mean, it hasn't evolved much, but expectations of trust from the citizenry has evolved. So for this, I would like to refer to the community trust scale that SkillSeed has developed. So for the past 10 years, SkillSeed has been journeying with different communities on the ground, and we've distilled our insights into something called a community trust scale. So it depicts how trust can flow from one form to the other, from dependent trust to transactional trust, and ultimately relational trust, right? So in the past, I would say that, you know, citizens would be more or less kind of satisfied with existing in an environment where there is dependent trust. So under this form, you know, leaders get the job done. Effectiveness is key, right? That's a key trust driver. Consistency is key, right? And that's enough for citizens. Okay, you get the job done, we can count on you, you're reliable, that's enough. But increasingly, we've seen on the ground, we've observed that now citizens and communities, they want more. They want, you know, transactional trust, but above and beyond, they want relational trust. So what does that mean? Okay, so in transactional trust, one of the key drivers that we've identified is authenticity, honesty. For example, if I give you $10 and I want to buy one whole chicken, are you going to chop it up and give me back one whole chicken? Or are you going to give me half a chicken and keep the other half, you know? So, and that is also about transparency, right? If we make a mistake, are we going to come up and own our mistake, or are we going to blame the weather, some other country, you know, and something else, right? So transparency, authenticity, that's very important. But I think we have come to a point where I feel that communities and citizens, they want to know if we care for them. They want to know if we care about what matters to them. And that is relational trust, where the human comes before everything else.
So it does appear that relational trust is harder to achieve, yet is more important than dependent and transactional trust.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is harder to achieve. Because like I said, when we have relational trust, stakeholders feel that you care about them, you care about what matters to them. But how do you get there? That means you actually have to sit down, be present, and listen to them. You have to get to know them as people before you can even know what matters to them, right? And time is scarce, especially for leaders. Do we have time to actually sit down and listen and really understand, right? So that's why it's really much harder to achieve. But it's very important, because if you are able to achieve relational trust, you build up a trust bank, right? So in relational trust, I'm not saying that effectiveness and consistency doesn't matter. It does. But when there are times where you genuinely make a mistake, you have that buffer for people to say, hey, it's all right. We know that you don't mean it, right? So for example, we work with a lot of community partners. And one thing that I've always promised for the past 10 years is that we always pay or transfer funds to our community partners on time or in advance. So what my hope is that if I ever make a mistake and I'm late, they're not thinking, Hui Jia, that red fink, she's absconded with our money, but they're thinking, oh no, is Hui Jia okay?
Yeah.
Is she fine? She's never done this before. What happened to her? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Hui Jia, I really appreciate your insights and your anecdotes this afternoon. That was Phua Hui Jia there. She is founder and a director at Skillseed. Do want to thank you again for coming on the show and
Thank you,
for giving us those examples that I'm sure businesses will be able to take heed. And now we want to take a look at this news report on the Trust Barometer 2023 by public relations and consultancy firm Edelman.
An all-time high for trust in Singapore's government. That's according to the latest Trust Barometer report by public relations and consultancy firm Edelman. The annual global survey is conducted online across 28 countries. Here are some of the results involving more than 1,000 respondents here. Now, it found that the government is the most trusted institution in Singapore, with more than 75% of respondents saying that they trust the government. That's 2 percentage points more than last year. It's also the fourth highest score globally, tying with Indonesia and India. Now, on the other hand, people's faith in businesses dipped, with only about 62% saying they trust them. The trust gap between government and businesses is also widening. Still, Singaporeans believe that to bring about change, both institutions should work closely together on societal issues like income inequality.
People believe that government and business working together in partnership will achieve the best results. In fact, 4 times more than if business were to work alone. And more than 1 in 2 people in Singapore believe that business can address contentious societal issues without being politicized.
Now, that survey by Edelman also talked about how the government and businesses working in partnership can achieve the best results. On average, in fact, 4 times more if businesses than if businesses were to work alone. And for more on the topic of trust, we've got one of our panel speakers here with us now, Ms. Pearlyn Pao, Group Chief Executive Officer at Singlife. Pearlyn, it's so good to have you on again this year. Let's talk a bit about this saying, okay, when they say trust is the currency of business, how do you interpret that?
I think trust is the foundation where all business relationships are formed. It is a timely reminder that success in organizations is not just about financial transactions. It's also about how trust has been earned and maintained with our customers, our employees, and our stakeholders. All of us are consumers, right? So why are we drawn to certain brands and certain products? Even in the financial services industry, our products and services are fast becoming commoditized. So what is going to set brands apart is really the experience that we have with the brand, how it makes us feel, how we can trust the brand. So for us in organizations and corporations, trust is key, and it becomes your brand name actually.
Well, specific to your industry, financial services, trust is a key pillar of the business. And so at Singlife, how do you guys practice trust within the company, with your stakeholders, and with your clients?
In the financial services industry, we deal with people's money. We have the responsibility of safeguarding our customers' funds and their financial well-being. And it's even more relevant in a company like Singlife because our core business is really about protecting lives and being with our customers through life's very different vagaries. So, and also our products and services are very long tail in nature. Our customers are with us for 25, 30 years. So it is very important that we embed trust in the way we run our business operations, in our culture, and in the way we interact with our customers. So at Singlife, trust is one of our core pillars. And we endeavor to provide our customers with a better way to financial freedom. And we do that by prioritizing transparency. We prioritize ease of understanding and also personalized interactions with us. And we always want to put our finger on the pulse by making sure that we run ongoing voice of the customer surveys to make sure that we hear the feedback and incorporate that into our business decision-making process.
Transparency and a lot of open communication and clear communication with stakeholders. Pauline, thank you so much. Appreciate your time coming on this afternoon with us. That was Pauline Pao, Group CEO at Sing Life. Now, coming up next is an exclusive look at CNA's new documentary, which will premiere tomorrow. That's the 28th of July at 9 p.m. Getting Real About Trust. Now, this is a documentary that examines what's eating Singapore's youth and how that affects trust. And it also explores ideas for sustaining trust among youths towards society and institutions. Now, the documentary aims to illustrate that trust is fragile yet powerful for the functioning of Singapore society. Here's a look at it.
How much trust people have in their societies, institutions, and governments varies from country to country, community to community. But what remains constant
we're sick and tired of it, and we're going to make a change.
Is the increasing scrutiny of an increasingly vocal young generation.
That you can be small and still be a giant.
I spoke to 8 Singaporean youths with different backgrounds and experiences to find out exactly what trust means to them.
I guess for me, trust is I trust that the person don't mean me any harm, but more than that, I trust that I'm emotionally safe with this person.
I don't see just trust as black and white. I see trust more of a spectrum. So my baseline trust, I feel some generic sense of safe, and that I trust that you have my best interests at heart.
I think for me, it's very important that someone is genuine. So if they are very showy about their accomplishments, I would hope that they are as honest about their struggles.
Trust has to be earned, but how trusting are Singaporeans towards strangers in their midst? In a study conducted by the Institute of Policy Studies, 2/3 of respondents felt they had to be very careful when dealing with people, especially when meeting them for the first time. But is it really so hard to elicit trust?
If we are talking about at first sight, right, when I see a stranger, I don't think Singaporeans are going to say immediately that I trust that person.
Trust means having the ability to suspend your suspicion or judgment about the other party and deciding that it's okay to interact with them.
Now, the trust survey by Edelman also found that the top 3 worries among respondents in Singapore are job loss, inflation, and climate change. Now, as a young person navigating an uncertain environment, how do we chart our way forward with trust? And how can a lack of trust affect youths in fulfilling their goals? Talking to us more about this is Mr. David Chua, he's CEO of the National Youth Council. David, it's good to have you on.
Thank you,
Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Let's talk about trust between youths and the government, as well as trust between youths and businesses and institutions. How have levels of trust changed, and more so during the pandemic, which I think had the most impact on the lives of youths?
Well, generally, trust in the government has been high pre-COVID. Post-COVID, we have found that the data shows young people are still quite trusting in the government. But that trust dimension is based on an assurance and confidence in the competence of the government. What we've seen from another longitudinal study on our young people are that there's another dimension of trust that we could probably do a lot better on, and that's linked to the issue of reciprocity. So young people have indicated that they trust the government, but they may not feel that the government trusts them as much. So this level of reciprocity is important going forward in ensuring that our trust quotient is stronger. Now, so that's with the government. The government, we have found that government-related services and institutions, whether it's to do with healthcare, civil defense, security, education, and government services in general, are all ranked top 5. We've seen that for businesses, major companies, non-profits, they are ranked around 9, 10, and just for interest, traditional media companies.
Okay.
Number 12 out of 14.
Okay.
So I'm just giving a benchmark of where our young people are feeling about things. For companies, typically the traditional view of trust was based on an assurance in the quality of your services or your products. But we've seen that young people now demand a lot more in terms of what they hope companies can demonstrate in terms of their values, whether they have fair practices, equitable practices, fair wages, whether they have sustainable practices as well. And these are things now that add on to the trust quotient. So there is a shift, and I think for whether it's both for government or companies, we all can do a lot better, both in terms of reciprocity, as well as some of these more demonstrated value aspects.
As you talked about, it's also that the expectations of young people have changed and they want more, they're expecting more. I personally do not think it's a bad thing to want to hold businesses accountable. After all, the impact can be large. So what specific examples, or can you give me or some of the expectations that young people want, especially what do they expect for those in positions of power?
Well, I think they're looking for a few things. For government, we've realized that maybe they're looking a lot more for transparency. What's going on behind our thought processes and our decisions? Could you tell us more? So rather than keeping it a closed box and letting them guess about what goes on, being transparent and being a bit more open about our thought considerations, that's one. For businesses, I would venture to say that that also applies. But increasingly, we think leaders providing a safe space with some degree of demonstrated vulnerability, that we don't know everything, we can't solve everything, and we do need your help, and we welcome your input. Also, some openness to suggestions and all that. But for people in positions of power and authority, another way to engender trust is to actually mentor, coach, give wise counsel. That gives you a sort of a way to build trust over a journey as opposed to just a transaction. So those are key considerations for leaders and people in authority, whether in government or in businesses.
That's actually an interesting point, showing that vulnerability. I suppose it makes one more relatable to young people, that they may not always have the answer, and that's perfectly fine. Importantly, I think also, why is it important to gain the trust of young people?
Well, a few things. One, you would gain some of their perspectives and their networks. But actually, more importantly, this reciprocity of trust actually sparks some confidence and agency in them. Because when you say that I don't discount you, notwithstanding your years of experience or your youth, actually what you do then is that you take a level of risk and you empower the young person, and that motivates the young person to take action and surprise you. So the advice I would give to older people like myself and people in leadership is to take a chance on your young people and let them surprise you.
That's very heartening to hear as a young person. I do want to ask you as well, looking at the broader, the broader scope of things, how can trust in young people help in nation building and strengthening, the social fabric?
So that level of trust has to do more with a collective kind of trust. And to get there are additional layers that we need to put in interventions for, whether it's to increase your network diversity, get you in contact with people from different backgrounds. But once you have that, what you have is people coming together to have shared endeavors, and that's the benefit. You are able to mobilize in times of need and crisis. So that's important for nation building and for social fabric, and the sense of like having one another's backs, and that's quite important.
Well, I have a quick last question for you. Young people, they're so absorbed, with their phone, social media, technology. It can be a hurdle to building trust, but at the same time, if used the right way, it can be a tool to bolster trust. How can it be used
I think for us, we think about trust building in a different way. There are many benefits to trust, but honestly, to get to that level of trust, little things add up. So it's the little things that we do in the everyday experiences that will add up to your trust quotient. It is that you must build on. It is not the big transactions or the big crisis. So that would help you build that, shore up all the trust quotient for mobilization and all the benefits that we need for the future to shore up our country.
Okay, David, thank you so much. David Chua, he is CEO of the National Youth Council. And in a few moments, we'll be taking you to the ballroom where we will be kicking off the CNA Leadership Summit. Of course, this would not be possible without our sponsors. Just like to take a quick moment to thank them so much. Presenting partner, Sing Life, impact partner, National Volunteer and Philanthropy Centre, and with support from a year of celebrating social services partners. And just a quick reminder for you that if you are just joining us, of course, a very warm welcome. You're watching this on our YouTube live stream as well as our LinkedIn live stream as well. And of course, this is all being made possible by our presenting partner, Sing Life, as well as our impact partner, the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Centre, with support from the Year of Celebrating Social Services Partner. Once again, we're coming to you live from the Singapore's Ritz-Carlton Hotel, and I'm going to be your host for the YouTube and LinkedIn segment. And here's a look at our partners at TVCs, who's our sponsors for this whole event.
It all does come down to our purpose.
We have to get more holistic solutions through.
This is going to be the largest industrial revolution in human history.
When you are an innovator, you always go in front of the path.
Traveling patterns will continue to evolve, technologies will continue to emerge. It's that commitment and the purpose that drive the people along. Focusing on the people is top priority.
Integrity is what you do when no one is watching.
When you lift the community, your business gets lifted up.
We have to involve the entire industry ecosystem to improve the health, confidence and well-being of the planet. And organizations like ours can really help them.
And so it helps us really, from a purpose perspective, support their growth and our growth.
And when we do that, the community benefits. And when the community benefits, the business will benefit.
Every sound, there are forces that move on the ground, turning the tides and the wheels of our lives, without glory or praise to be found. Like a new moon that hides in the night, there were giants in it in plain sight, and their deeds will be seen, but they slip through the seams like invisible rays of the light. Can you see the strength at the joint, the glue in the fold, the roots of the tree, the heat and the cold? These are the giants unsung. Look to the good they have done. In the midst of our lives, they are leading the light. Giants, each and every one. Giants, each and every one.
All of you just joining us, a very warm welcome to you. You're watching the CNA Leadership Summit, Trust Matters. We're coming to you live from the Ritz-Carlton, Singapore. I'm your host for this afternoon, Elizabeth Neo. Now, we're going to be kicking things off very shortly, and that's going to be starting with what's happening in the ballroom just beside me. We'll be popping in there very soon, but before that, I want to tell you what you can expect. And we've got an opening keynote address by Mr. Edwin Tong. He is Singapore's Minister for Culture, Community and Youth, as well as Second Minister for Law. He will be speaking about how the government can build on the trust of society and work closer with businesses, which includes media and non-government organizations, in order to strengthen the social fabric so as to create a robust ecosystem for Singapore to navigate the systemic changes in our multipolar world. And we will begin our panel discussions very shortly after. The first one, Doing Right, starts at the boardroom. That will be moderated by my colleague Stephen Chia. And the panelists for that session include top executives from SingLife, EasyLink, Microsoft, and the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Centre. And we will learn more on how company leaders can foster a workplace culture where trust and collaboration thrive while maintaining a focus on revenue goals. So let's take you over there to the ballroom right now.
And when we do that, the community benefits. And when the community benefits, the business will benefit.
Sound. There are voices that move from the ground, turning the tides and the wheels of our lives, without glory or praise to be found. Like the new moon that hides in the night, there are giants in it in plain sight, and their deeds will be seen, but they slip through the scenes like invisible rays of the light. Can you see the strength at the joint, the glue and the fold, the roots of the tree, the heat and the cold? These are the giants unsung. Look to the good they have done. In the midst of our lives, they are leading the light. Giants, each and every one. Giants, each and every one. what's light on the way
Hello and good afternoon to you all. Good afternoon, everyone. A warm welcome. Mr. Edwin Tong, Minister for Culture, Community and Youth, Second Minister for Law, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome. On behalf of Mediacorp, welcome to the CNA Leadership Summit 2023 on Trust Matters. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. A big shout out to our partners as well, Sing Life, National Volunteer and Philanthropy Centre, and of course support from our year of celebrating social service partners. So thank you all for supporting this event. My name is Stephen Chia. I'm a CNA presenter. I'm the host of Talking Point, which is a show that covers a lot of stuff from eating fried chicken, drinking bubble tea. Guess what? I'm now doing a durian experiment. I know. Don't come so close because I've been eating 2 weeks of durians every day to see what it does to my body. So watch the show. I think the results will be quite interesting. I also host a CNA podcast. It's called Heart of the Matter. We cover many of the pressing issues that we feel people in Singapore are interested to hear about. Now, just before we proceed with the summit, a quick reminder on some housekeeping matters. You know we are recording this session, so please put your phones to silent mode if you can. Also, we'll be taking some questions from you, the audience. I hope you have questions later on for my panel. You can either come to the mic when there's an opportunity, or there's a QR code on your table. You can scan that and via Pigeonhole send in your questions as well. We've got the password on screen, CNA 2707. Now, the CNA Leadership Summit 2023 on Trust Matters is the fifth of the CNA Leadership Summit series. Now, this is a hybrid event, which means besides all of you good folks here in the room, we also have folks joining us via CNA YouTube and CNA LinkedIn. And this is not just in Singapore, but across the region as well. Now, the importance of trust has become increasingly evident as the world navigates through the aftermath of the global pandemic and grapples with new geopolitical challenges. Governments, institutions, and businesses, they all rely on trust, which is crucial for social unity and well-being. Trust directly impacts a government's ability to govern effectively and also plays a significant role in reducing transaction costs in any social, economic, or political relationship. And as nations strive to regain normalcy and revive their economies, they'll not only need to determine the right policies to adapt, but also to face the challenge of implementing them successfully. And when trust in governments, market, institutions, when all this is lacking, then it becomes really challenging to do all that, to garner public support, to build the necessary blocks for that infrastructure. So trust is at the foundation of it all, and we will touch more on this later in our two panel discussions. At this point in time, it gives me great pleasure to help us kick off the summit to invite Mediacorp's Chief Executive Officer, Ms. Tham Lok King, on stage to say a few words. Lok King, please.
Guest of Honour, Mr. Edwin Tong, Minister of Culture, Community and Youth, and Second Minister for Law, distinguished guests and colleagues, as well as all our viewers from Singapore and the region who are watching now on CNA YouTube's live stream. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you to the 5th CNA Leadership Summit. I see many familiar faces in the ballroom, but also new friends attending for the first time. Each year, the CNA Summit gathers thought leaders to discuss issues of significance to Singapore and to Asia. In the past 4 editions, we have tackled a variety of topics: the digital economy, a sustainable green recovery, women inspiring change, and mental health at work. This year, our topic is Trust Matters. In March, the Edelman Trust Barometer, an annual global survey on trust, found that in Singapore, the government remains the most trusted institution. In fact, trust levels were at a high. On the average, 50% of respondents around the world trust their own governments. But in Singapore, a significantly higher 76% of respondents say that they trust their government. Shortly, we will hear from Minister Edwin Tong about preserving this level of trust in government. We will also hear from two separate panels of business leaders who will share their experiences in building and strengthening trust with their employees, with customers, and society at large. I look forward to their insights, but so as not to cover the same ground, let me speak briefly about trust in news media. Based on the annual digital news report by the Reuters Institute for Journalism at Oxford University, which was released last month, on average, trust in the news around the world has fallen 2 percentage points. 40% of respondents say they trust most news most of the time. The good news is that in Singapore, mainstream news fared better than the global average. 45% say they trust most news most of the time, up from 36% in 2020. The Reuters Institute report also names CNA as the most trusted news brand in Singapore for the 5th consecutive year. CNA's brand trust score has risen to 75%, up 3 percentage points from last year. In total, Mediacorp has 5 news brands among the top 10 trusted in Singapore, including Today, Channel 5 News, Channel 8 News, and Mediacorp Radio News. Annual rankings aside, in November 2020, right in the midst of the pandemic, the London-based Association for International Broadcasting, or the AIB, the global group for broadcast journalism, named CNA the Channel of the Year. In their published comments, the international panel of AIB judges praised CNA not only for its varied content, meaningful engagement, and polished production, but I think more importantly for its clear and coherent news editorial values. These values, which center around quality, objectivity, and a diversity of views, are fiercely guarded by our newsroom. Annual rankings, my apologies, yeah. These results and accolades point to the trust that our audiences place in our content, and that is a privilege that we take very seriously. Preserving this high level of trust in Singapore's news media is fundamental, because as a public service media network, we play a critical role in providing trusted news and information to help Singaporeans understand the world around them and to make well-informed decisions. But there are significant challenges to news media on the horizon, and I will just cite 2. Firstly, unfair criticism. Looking across its entire global data set, the Reuters Institute of Journalism says that there is a correlation between low trust and media criticism. Some of the highest reported levels of media criticism are found in countries with highest levels of distrust. The lowest levels of criticism are often in those with the highest level of trust, such as in Finland, in Norway, and in Denmark. Fortunately, in Singapore, only 30% of those surveyed by the Reuters Institute say that they have heard, either very often or quite often, people criticizing journalists or the news media. The research concludes that one factor contributing to low trust in news media is the widespread criticism of media from a range of sources. Increasingly polarized debates have also made it harder to deliver news that is seen to be impartial by every part of society. The second challenge that we face is in the abuse of artificial intelligence. AI, of course, has opened the door to disinformation on steroids. Globally, nearly 60% of news consumers say that they are worried about telling the difference between what is real and what is fake. AI offers tremendous potential to significantly reduce the time spent on mundane and repetitive tasks, to automate our workflow, and even help us to be more creative. But if misused deliberately or carelessly through a lack of guardrails, AI can severely undermine trust in our brand. NewsGuard, which tracks online disinformation amongst news sites, has identified 166 unreliable generative AI-driven news sites in 12 different languages. It is rotten apples like these that have a direct impact on trust in the entire news media landscape. Addressing these complex issues that we face today will require a continual and collaborative effort across public and private sectors. I hope that today's summit will be an opportunity for all of us to build connections and to maintain trust-based relationships with our communities. Thank you very much, and I have to first also thank all our speakers for being part of the CNA Summit. I look forward to an afternoon of insights, and I hope that you will all enjoy the summit. Thank you.
Thank you, Looking, for that. And now it's my privilege to invite our guest of honor, Mr. Edwin Tong, Minister for Culture, Community and Youth, and Second Minister for Law, to come forward and say a few words.
Thank you very much for the welcome. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me here to speak at this summit on a very important topic, the question of how we can collectively build trust in the 21st century. Over the next 20 minutes or so, I plan to focus specifically on public trust in the context of governance and governments, elaborating on the Singapore context of how I see public trust, and trying to persuade you about the importance of public trust and the correlation that it has with a broad range of socio-economic outcomes, and why it is particularly pertinent for Singapore and how we have been and will continue to strive to build public trust. Let me first start by defining public trust. In my view, there are two broad dimensions to public trust. First, the trust that exists in any people-to-government relationship, where trust in political leaders provides the basis or the legitimacy to govern. This also extends to trust in public institutions that are set up by the government to give effect to and carry out its policies. I would add that this aspect of public trust is particularly important in Singapore, perhaps more so than in some other countries. In our system of governance, there are government policies which affect almost every aspect of a citizen's life, ranging from healthcare, housing, to education, to personal transport, a whole range of social assistance schemes, and even starting a family. This trust, in turn, has to be constantly earned by showing that policies improve people's lives. A quid pro quo, if I may say, where citizens support policies which contribute to our overall prosperity and social harmony, as they trust that the government will have the best interests of Singapore and Singaporeans at heart. And in our system, as in any democratic system, when people stop believing that the government is doing a good job, not doing right with the policies, they can go to the ballot box and choose a different government. And I think that's the social compact that exists in and around the public trust paradigm. The other dimension of public trust lies in the strength of a society's people-to-people relationship. This is equally integral to building public trust, leading to a well-functioning society. At a broad level, social trust represents the people's confidence in their social community. According to political scientist Robert Putnam, civic engagement in the community and interpersonal trust and how we relate to one another contribute overall to our sense of social trust, how we feel and how we interrelate to one another in our community. For us in Singapore, this is also very important. The fabric of our nation is a colorful, diverse, multi-ethnic, multicultural one. We appreciate and we treasure this diversity. But we also know that the diverse groups in Singapore, existing in Singapore, in a small space in Singapore, also presents challenges for us in maintaining racial and religious harmony, If you're not careful, fault lines can be accentuated and can sometimes develop into deep, divisive tensions, and this undermines social cohesion and overall diminishes public trust. That's why we've always been very careful with our social policies to strike a very delicate balance. Harmony across race and religion, as well as taking care to mitigate social inequality. Our founding leaders had the foresight to enshrine within our Constitution the most basic document in Singapore for the government of the day, for any government of the day, to always have regard to the interests of our racial and religious minorities. We've also set up the Presidential Council on Minority Rights, something that is not commonplace in many other countries, whose role is to scrutinize all legislation that may have been passed in Parliament to ensure that they do not disadvantage any specific community in Singapore. We also have laws like the Maintenance of Religious Harmony Act, which set out clear parameters to deter hate speech and other derogatory comments on religious communities. But it is not just the hard policies, the laws and the frameworks, but also the softer ones, the institutions that we set up, like, for example, self-help groups within the community to look after the needs of each specific community. And that's why we maintain strong links with them and through them with each community to ensure that each community remains robust and we're able to be very focused and targeted in the support that we give. But these two dimensions of public trust that I've outlined, they are separate, but sometimes the outcomes that they achieve are not mutually exclusive. In fact, very often they are complementary. And one such example of this complementariness and where they intersect is in the ethnic integration policy introduced a few decades ago. The policy, or the EIP, was set in place to preserve Singapore's multicultural identity and promote racial integration and harmony, ensuring that there is a balanced mix of the various ethnic communities in all our HDB precincts. Back then and now, it has been said that EIP infringes on individual choice and results in a less flexible housing market, not much free choice for some. On occasion, this can happen, and HDB steps in, takes steps to mitigate. But the government remained firm on this decision. Why? Because we understood the importance of intervening early in where and how people live. This move would allow people of different races and religions to understand each other better and endeavor to avoid the racial and religious riots that were commonplace in the 1960s. And by and large, we have succeeded on this account. This is unlike so many other countries where, left to its natural state, unchecked, unintervened, people tend to gather with their own kind. And this is quite usual. It's not unusual and it's not a criticism, but it happens. And so for us, for example, within ethnic enclaves in the US or the ballots that you see across France, resulting in certain precincts defined by the ethnicity of its inhabitants, people from other ethnicities might find it difficult to want to live in those precincts. And we don't want to see this in Singapore. So we intervene with a policy which now ensures that in our everyday lived experiences, in schools, at home, where we work, where we play, we mix and mingle with people from different ethnicities and cultures all the time. So that's a broad frame of what I define as public trust. Let me turn now to why upholding this public trust is so important. Early on, Steve mentioned that public trust is called the currency of governance. He was quoting from a concept that's coined by a well-known political scientist, Francis Fukuyama, who believed that the higher the element of public trust, the lower the transaction costs can be in any social, economic, or political system. And when the transaction costs are lowered, it becomes less difficult to implement policies that are right for the country, even if they may be unpopular. One other reason why public trust is important is because the higher the level of public trust, the more likely a society will see socio-political stability and, in turn, economic progress. Based off a 2021 survey and an article published by Deloitte, a meta-analysis shows that a 10 percentage point increase in public trust within a country can raise the annual per capita GDP by about 0.5 percentage points. Now, it's one survey, it's one data point, But I think the correlation between stability brought about by public trust and socio-political economic outcomes, I think, can't be underestimated. And if this survey is correct, then it is a substantial gain, given that the annual global per capita real GDP growth averaged about 2.2% between 2015 and 2019, the pre-COVID pandemic years. In Singapore, we of course look at various data points, one of which was mentioned earlier, the Edelman Trust Barometer, a well-established survey that, while has a relatively small sample size, does represent an important data point for us. One other reason we look at these data points and look constantly to build public trust is because we know that without public trust, societal order can quickly become dysfunctional. This in turn hinders the rule of law. In Singapore, a non-negotiable fundamental tenet which underpins our survival and success as a nation, and in fact, underscores and undergirds all that we construct in Singapore, all our policies and institutions. And I remember what Mr. Lee Kuan Yew once said about law and order, that while good laws lead to good order, it may sometimes be more accurate to invert the two, to look at how order gets us good laws. And let me give you one example of what this means in Singapore's context. The United States have been for some time experiencing declining levels of public trust over several decades now. This includes a serious erosion of trust in its public institutions, and this includes the police. Trust in the police has come down in the US, and this in turn has led to difficulties in enforcing the rule of law, leading sometimes to perverse social outcomes. Some of you might recall the George Floyd incident some years ago in 2020, one of the latest in a series of a number of high-profile cases where the police in the US had arrested an African American. In those cases, the debate was less on whether a crime had been committed and whether the suspect was properly apprehended based on a suspicion of a crime, but more on whether the suspect victim was unfairly targeted by the police because of racial discrimination. So the merits mattered far less than the process and the optics. And this arises because there's a general lack of confidence in the police. And as I said, this is unsurprising when we see the data that trust in government and in public institutions have been declining in the US over the last few decades, resulting in also a falling confidence in the police. A decline in trust in government and in our public institutions can lead to serious adverse social outcomes. We cannot allow such doubt and erosion of public trust in our institutions to take root in Singapore. We also had a recent incident in the wake of the tragic passing of a police officer, Sergeant Yuvraj, son of Gopal. He was said to have made several allegations of racial discrimination and workplace bullying against him. When this happens, the authorities will have to review and thoroughly investigate these claims, almost immediately, without allowing for this to fester, for speculations to develop. MHA acknowledged the seriousness of the allegations, confirmed that SPF will investigate thoroughly and get to the bottom of it and be publicly accountable. These responses, in my view, are important. It tells the public that no one is above the system, and in turn helps to preserve the integrity of the systems that serve us, and also be accountable to the public, so that the public can continue to invest trust in the institutions to carry out its duties. If we had let it go, not done an investigation or assumed that there was nothing about it, doubt and suspicion will ensue. And if there are doubts on police impartiality and fairness, it will be very difficult for the police to carry out law enforcement effectively. And this is why, using this as one example, we must constantly strive to ensure we get the system right each time and every time. And whilst public trust in peacetime is important, a high level of trust would be fundamentally crucial when navigating a crisis. And one example, of course, is COVID-19. A black swan event, we did not know what we were dealing with, novel, uncertain, with not much to fall back on by way of experience, and also significant uncertainty over the disease outcomes and vaccinations. in very much uncharted territory. The government had to look after both lives and livelihoods. But what we had going for us was a very high level of trust and social capital built up over the many years preceding. We avoided in Singapore many mass-scale protests which occurred in other countries where people expressed discontent with lockdown measures, with mask mandates, vaccination requirements, and other safe management restrictions. We were able to focus on charting a path out of the pandemic together with Singaporeans, with many Singaporeans themselves also stepping up, volunteering to help fellow Singaporeans to keep safe, and sometimes doing this at some risk to themselves too. Building on this trust, we were able to devise and implement our policies well, such as safe management measures, vaccinations, and we carried our population along. As a result, Singapore was one of the first countries to reach the endemic state, reopen our borders, resume normality in our businesses and in our travel, and with the businesses, economies, lives, livelihoods being protected, emerging from this pandemic and really benefiting from this rebound. When we carried out a review of our COVID management measures, Prime Minister noted that when he was reviewing our responses each time, at the time it was happening, 2020, 2021, Singaporeans trusted that the government had the best interests of Singapore and Singaporeans at heart, and this trust was key to the country's handling of the COVID-19 crisis. A post-pandemic survey by the Pew Research Center, sometime last year, I believe, corroborates this finding, showing that Singaporeans was amongst a handful of a minority of countries that grew more united after the pandemic than before. And it is this social unity and public trust that had enabled us to navigate these very uncertain times, uncharted territories, difficult moments, when it exposed fault lines in other countries. I've spent some time explaining why public trust is key to good social economic outcomes for society. But let me also say how difficult it will be to maintain this public trust. The immediate challenge is that public trust levels all over the world have been on the decline. If you take the same Edelman barometer survey that was referred to earlier, and you looked at the column that says, what's the average trust in government across all countries surveyed, you will see that there's a steady decline over the decades. Indeed, according to a UN study, whilst data for long-run trends are limited, the available data does show a marked decrease in public trust in institutions in many developed countries. More recent data across a broader range of countries also show a decline in trust in most public bodies, falling from an average of 46% in 2006 to 36% in 2019. So roughly about a 10 percentage point drop over a period of about 13, 14 years. A very alarming trend and a very steep, sharp drop. And we cannot in Singapore, despite the fact that we achieved 76% last year on the back of COVID, the highest since the survey started, we can't assume that we will be immune to these challenges. And we continue every day to be buffeted by forces which tend to weaken public trust. All of you know of some, but let me just highlight three. First, the rise of anti-establishment populism, where political parties move to the two extremes of the political spectrum. We see this happening in the US quite a bit, in Europe, and also closer to home in parts of Asia. This has resulted in adverse outcomes where people push against the establishment, sometimes with adverse consequences. And in my view, Brexit was one example. Second, coupled with that, the rise of social media that has accentuated the post-truth environment. Post-truth is an environment where the truth or objective facts are less relevant when trying to shape public opinion, less relevant than things like sentiment, emotions. The truth barometer is not really a measure when it comes to trying to influence public opinion. This phenomenon was so commonplace that in 2016, Oxford made post-truth the word of the year in 2016. Not something to be proud of, but it shows you the extent to which this has become prevalent. And the rise of social media has really fueled this, where people say what they want to say, often using divisive rhetoric as a clickbait, because After all, that's what drives attention to their content and to their pages. And the fact that you can do this anonymously is what emboldens both the content and its creator. And all of this collectively undermines public trust. Third, in today's context, our geopolitical environment, our social economic environment, inflation, cost of living, supply chain disruptions, climate challenges, the post-pandemic introspection, and a lot more individual focus that we have, lines being drawn on identity, on one side, not just race and religion, but sexuality, gender, age. It is a world where people are more mindful of their differences than their commonalities, and where there is a greater protectionist instinct, be it in trade, where we see more instances of reshoring or friendshoring to be protectionist, as well as challenging for spaces for diverse religions to be practiced. This leads to greater fragmentation and divisiveness, which is really the antithesis of the building of good public trust and social cohesion. So these collective factors mean that we will continue to be challenged in the foreseeable future. Public trust will come under increasing pressure. In this climate, it is important that the government continues to take the lead in pushing against these trends. The government must play a role to actively build and further public trust, be it across people-to-government relationships or people-to-people relationships. In my ministry, we focus more on the elements of the second limb. So let me conclude this speech with a few points on how we can continue to foster a stronger sense of cohesion amongst Singaporeans. Over the past year or so, we've been engaged in the Forward Singapore conversations to review our social compact, to relook at the paradigm, to redefine what each of us as fellow citizens would be willing to do to each other and for each other to make Singapore stronger than the sum of its parts. This is important to collectively move Singapore forward on this new paradigm. And we are indeed facing a number of different inflection points. Beyond what I've mentioned, we're also seeing a very quickly changing demographic. Younger and newer aspirations have to be met. And our young people today are so mobile. The skills that they acquire are so transportable. So we do have to find a basis and an anchor into Singapore. As our society can only advance and resilience be built when everyone recognizes they have a place in this society, where they can realize their aspirations fully, where they feel cared for and included, that is our challenge. On one such aspect of this, which is the aspirations of our young people, let me say that it is critical that we give them a space in policy making. They must be heard, their views matter, and in very many cases, sometimes the lack of experience or less experience, as most young people will tend to have, is not really a barrier in policy making today, in thinking of new ideas, in trying to fashion new designs. So through the Forward Singapore exercise, it is very much clear that the youth are seized with topical issues, today's issues, for tomorrow's benefit, much more than ever before. So it is with this in mind that one tangible outcome of the Forward Singapore dialogue is the setting up of what we call the youth panels. The youth panels will be set up across Singapore on different issues, different panels for different issues, to allow youth leaders to have the space and a stake in policy making, where we will share with young people our policy considerations, and most importantly, the trade-offs that will be inevitable in any policy, on various topics, data points being exchanged, and to try and think through the problem with them and try and design the policy to deal with the issues and concerns that they have in mind. And what we intend to do is for at least one of these over the next couple of years with recommendations to be discussed at important platforms, including in Parliament, the highest, most important forum we have in Singapore, so that there's a direct resonance behind and between what is discussed at these panels and what is brought up in the public space for policy making. Second, we must continue to nurture a culture of care and inclusion in Singapore. I said at the start that we have a range of social policies which intersect with a citizen's life in so many ways. We must continue to use these policies to shape and foster a strong sense of belonging to Singapore. where each Singaporean feels at home and is included in our society. In Singapore, we build cohesion in a very unique way. We have many volunteer networks and organizations, some ground up, some through social service agencies, some coming from the People's Association. Social cohesion is built up from the ground, bit by bit, grassroots by grassroots, in almost a very retail fashion, knocking door to door, going block to block, precinct to precinct. That was how we built up the social capital and goodwill that I spoke about that saw us through COVID. This work, in my view, is even more relevant today than it ever has been, given all the threats that we have outlined and that I see. PA was started more than 60 years ago now with a mission of connecting people and people to government, trying to build goodwill amongst the grassroots and help people in a very face-to-face way. That, I think, remains very relevant today, if not more relevant. This culture of care and inclusion that we aim to build must also include persons with disabilities, empowering persons with disabilities to pursue their aspiration, realize their potential, and participate in civic life, just as you and I and anyone here would. For public trust can't really be sustainably built if we have some segments of our society feeling like they have been left behind, feeling that they're not part of that compact, or don't feel inclusive in our policies. And that's why in the government, under my ministry, we have been reviewing the outcomes of our Disability Sport Master Plan. These initiatives better support persons with disabilities in sport participation, something that is very close to my heart, looking at sport as a tremendous way to level the playing field and to really be more inclusive. And when I speak to athletes who compete with disabilities, Yip Ping Siu, our champion Paralympian, and when I asked her how she first got into sport to become such a champion swimmer, she said it was just for therapy. It was because when I was in the water with her condition, I didn't feel different from anyone else. And I think this is a very powerful narrative for us to make sure that we build a culture of care and inclusion in Singapore. Third, we must focus on reducing our social inequality. Much progress on this has already been made over the years, but it remains crucial to strengthen this trust factor across all demographics. That same Edelman Trust Barometer, when I looked through it, I saw an interesting, maybe not often reported statistic, and it is this, that Singapore registered an income-based trust gap of 18 points between high and low-income earners in the 2023 Trust Barometer survey. In other words, when you ask someone, do they trust institutions, governments, businesses, NGOs, and so on, there's an 18-point gap between those at the top end of the income and those at the bottom end of the income. And that's the 7th highest worldwide. And I believe that if we are not careful and allow this to grow, this social inequality will weaken public trust and erode our social cohesion. And that's why we have maintained a very clear eye on policies to help the lowest income in Singapore. We have also put a lot of attention on early childhood, especially for families of the lower income, because we recognize that in the longer term, this is the one powerful measure that can help uplift people and break intergenerational inequality. Finally, since I'm in a room of corporate leaders and C-suite leaders, let me conclude with what corporate Singapore can do. One further observation from the Edelman Trust Barometer is that whilst trust in government in Singapore remained high and in fact rose over the last couple of years, there has, however, been a perceptible decrease in the trust levels in NGOs and businesses. It's not a big one, but there is a perceptible drop over the last couple of years. And this is an observation that we should pay attention to. We have stepped up on corporate philanthropy because we believe that a shared responsibility to the community will not only be advantageous for the community, but also for the businesses themselves. Trust gives companies the social license to operate in today's business climate. Investors and employees also want to be driven by a larger purpose beyond just the remuneration in their employers, where they can contribute to the well-being of the society and make meaningful contributions through the businesses that they work for. And this is why the work of the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Centre, NVPC, is so important. They play a critical role in setting up the infrastructure and organizing and partnering with many companies in their journey of doing good. This has resulted in initiatives such as the Unilever NBPC Purpose for Growth program that supports SMEs on their corporate purpose journeys. Another example is Project V, a national-level effort between MCCY, NBPC, and the National Council of Social Services, NCSS, to enable companies and employees to do corporate volunteering en masse at scale. The famous American economist Milton Friedman said in 1970, not that long ago, about 50 years ago, that there is, and I quote, one and only one social responsibility of business, to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase its profits. I think this is now so out of sync with corporate philosophy and vision today. But thankfully, in Asia, and particularly in Singapore, we've always had a very different outlook on corporate philanthropy. The business leaders in Singapore have always been at the forefront of corporate giving. Just think Tan Kah Kee, Tan Tock Seng, the Alsagoff families, so many more that have left legacies behind for us today. We have a rich history of corporate giving and philanthropists. And as Mr. Tan Tock Seng said, and I quote, ever since I began running my business, in my private heart, I've always desired to be able to do something for abandoned and suffering people. Maybe a different time, a different era, but still not less relevant today. And I think that purpose, keeping the businesses going, making them a part of the community, a contributing part of the community, is so paramount. If Singapore wants to succeed in building public trust and engender social cohesion, then I think we need all aspects of society to come on board alongside us. Individuals, businesses, NGOs, the media, to contribute towards enhancing social cohesion and building public trust. Thank you very much for listening to me this afternoon, and I wish all of you a great summit ahead. Whatever questions you might have for me, you can ask the panel later. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Tong, giving us a lot of food for thought. In fact, he's covered much of the ground we want to also look at later in the panel. Unfortunately, he's arrowed the questions to us, so that's okay. I know your phone number, Minister Tong. Okay, well, as the groups just set up the stage, I mean, we're going to have a panel discussion. And you know, I mean, trust is paramount. We've heard it before. We know that trust takes years to make, a second to break, and forever to repair. So it's a saying that applies not only to people, but also to businesses. And it's the trust that we have that allows us to have that working relationship. You know, you trust a company will deliver the products and services, and so you shop online, you pay first, you know. We trust that leaders of our organization will take care of us. So I go to work, I do my job, I trust and know that I should get paid my salary at the end of the month. So trust is the catalyst to close that deal. It's the one thing that binds us in that relationship. And it starts from the very moment we are born into this world, when we learn to rely and trust that our parents would take care of us. In fact, a few years back, my son was 9 years old. We were driving in the car, and I have a very old car, and the glove box wasn't closing properly. So I was saying something, I got to look at it, figure out a way to fix it. To which my son then said, Dad, trust me, you don't want to use Velcro for this. Why? It's a total ripoff. I actually had a proud dad moment at that time. I was like, this is a dad joke, man, and he got it, so okay. So trust, not exactly in the same frame, but of course we know trust is the catalyst, the one thing that binds us, the glue that ties it all together, because if that relationship is broken, then many other things cannot happen. And that's what our panel discussion is going to be about. Doing right, it starts at the ballroom, or it starts at the boardroom, or does it? I have a wonderful panel joining me. I'm going to invite them on stage right now. We'll just pop up on screen who they are. Ms. Lee Hui Lee is the Managing Director for Microsoft Singapore. As they make their way up on stage, Mr. Nicholas Lee, Chief Executive Officer for EasyLink, Ms. Perlin Pao, Group CEO for SingLife, and Mr. Tony So, CEO for National Volunteer and Philanthropy Centre. A reminder, you can send in your questions via Pigeonhole. You just scan the QR code on your tables. The password is CNA2707. And if you want to, you can also ask a question real life in person. We'll have the mics going on a little bit later. Okay, but otherwise, I will warm them up first and get the ball rolling. So Welcome. Our topic is trust. Does it begin at the ballroom? So, Hui-Li, if I can start with you. We've heard so much about how trust is the fundamental element in so many things. But is it true that it has to start at the boardroom?
Right. Thank you. Firstly, thank you for inviting me to the panel. I would say the tone just starts from the top, the boardroom, the executive management. I think that's very critical because that sets the tone for the organization. I'll give example in Microsoft. We went through a massive organization transformations in 2014 when we have our CEO Satya that came in 2014. So trust in terms of setting the values is foundational, but more importantly, as we kind of look at how we bring this across in Microsoft, we operate more than 100 countries. It starts with the tone, but it's more important, I call out culture. Culture is so important because that drives how you cascade down and drive the consistency of that. So if you kind of read the book that Satya had, it's Heat Refresh. It started with the top, with the tone on the leadership philosophy that we wanted to transform to more of an innovative, very collaborative with empathy. And that sets the tone of how the different leadership across 100 countries, all the employees, that we cascaded down. So I want to call it out because that does start from the tone, but how do you really drive it across the whole organization? I would say culture is very critical for you to build that trust, as you kind of cascade it across the different organizations. Okay. And when you talk about trust, it does for big organizations or any organization, it starts from the employees. How do you build that culture? Because the employees become the brand ambassador for us as we extend out to the customers, working with the government agencies, as well as with the partners.
Right. So in a way, you're saying the tone is set right at the top from the board, but it's up to the individual employees, the staff, to really live out that culture. So Tony, in that respect then, because as Hui-Li has mentioned, in different countries, it'll be different people running the organizations. Must we trust that individual? Is it an individual thing? Must I trust the leader in my organization? What does it say about the organization if I don't trust my leader?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think it's really important that, as Hui-Li says, the trust actually starts with how leaders articulate, what the organization stands for. And I think if there is a disconnect between the leader and the organization and how they're trusted or not trusted, I think fundamentally there will be a problem, because it does suggest that perhaps, as Hui-Li says, if the work has not been cascaded down, the different employees don't imbibe those values, I think the internal, external stakeholders will also begin to wonder if this organization is for real, right? I mean, whatever they say, is it just only a public persona, or is it living out those values? And I think in the area of sustainability, we all know this term called greenwashing, right? And I think one of the issues that we have is that perhaps the leaders talk the talk, but unfortunately, the organizations don't walk that talk. And so in our view, for MBPC's perspective, when we talk about company of good and the things we want to do, actually we believe that the best way to do sustainability, and in fact, a lot of things that we want to do to build trust, actually starts from the purpose, the core of the organization. Why are we here? What does the organization exist? And when the purpose connects with the values of who the organization is, and that aligns to vision, mission, and also strategy, I think the ability to then cascade it down the organization and have a very consistent internal, external engagement, that's going to present, that holistic picture across all stakeholders, such that actually the organization begins to be trusted. Right. And the trust is, as Minister says, the social license to operate. And in our view, it's also the way to be more competitive, more resilient, and more future ready.
But in that respect, it also means the leader must really live and breathe that same culture and believe it, right? Indeed. I mean, Perlin, if I ask you, why are the two inseparable? Why is the leader and the company as an organization inseparable?
Firstly, thanks for having me. We do believe that no organizations can operate efficiently if there is no trust in the leadership. The leaders set the tone right at the top of the house. It influences and impacts the way employees operate, employees interact with each other, how we collaborate, and how we actually engage with the customers. So when there is trust in the leadership, it also means that there's trust in the sustainability of the business in the long term, that leaders will be around to do the right thing and to steer the company in the right direction. And when there is a sense of trust in the organization, I think people feel a lot more united. They know that there is, they're headed towards the same direction, there is the same purpose, and there is a greater sense of collaboration within the organization.
But what if the organization isn't so trustworthy to begin with? So Nicholas, I put this to you. What if, it's in a bad spot? Can you make the organization trustworthy? Can you make someone trustworthy?
Thanks, Stephen, for the question. I don't think there's a perfect answer for that, but perhaps I find it quite hard to believe that an organization can exist with zero trust within the company itself. But I think also there are many ways to slowly build up that trust, if trust is at the minimal level. And going through many consultants that have given their advice, personally, I think there are three key things or three core things. And the first thing being what was mentioned very consistently is consistency, right? You have to do what you say, right? If you do something else, then of course trust diminishes significantly. Your employees look at you differently, your colleagues, your peers, even at the boardroom, that trust erodes very quickly. The second thing I think we can do to improve a lot more on trust is communication. It is always important to make sure we have open, honest communication across various levels, because sometimes if we don't communicate well, people walk away with different perceptions, with different expectations. So I think communication is key, so we set the right perceptions or the right expectations, and when something happens, then of course that trust continues to build because you know that will happen and you expect it of that person. And probably the third thing is, I would like to say, a safe operating place. Yeah. So a safe operating place means you create a culture where people are open and they are willing to voice out alternative views, alternative suggestions. They are willing to talk about their mistakes, their challenges, without fear of reprimand, penalty, right? And I think this is highly important because that means that it creates an environment of creativity, progress, instead of being reactive, and it also fosters more innovation, more forward thinking. So I think these are the few things, in my view, that we can do to slowly cultivate or build that trust if it's lacking in an organization.
And to build that environment, to create that environment to the point where your staff are fully, feel confident and trusting that they can come to you openly is quite challenging as well. And we got to look at it, in light of recent circumstances, we also have to ask if trust is, looked at differently in different sectors. And for different people, our standards and expectations of trust are different depending on who they are, where they work, what they do, private sector versus public sector. Do we have different standards for different people and different roles? Maybe, Tony, you can start with this, because in the charity sector, and you've worked in the commercial sector as well, is it looked at differently?
I think the trust, of course, in different roles, there are different expectations. I always think, maybe simplistically, that trust is a difference between your promise, which sets certain expectation, and performance. What are you expected to do in that role? And are you delivering on that? Of course, if you are delivering on over-delivering, you build trust. But if you are over-promising and under-delivering, you erode trust. So I think maybe in the corporate world, unfortunately, Minister talked about this, the Milton Friedman idea that companies maybe are purely for profit. And unfortunately, there is still that essence of that thinking in many companies. And when they talk about sustainability and all the good things, but yet they still think about profit, it tends to be, you are not authentic, and if you're not authentic, it's very hard to hide that today. So for the corporate context, to me, the big difference today and the big divide is whether their companies are still profit-driven but try to be sustainable, or are you implementing it sustainably? So that is in the corporate context. But in the nonprofit world, I think it's again about the promise and the performance. And I think what we promise in terms of being able to deliver service, in being able to govern our resources well, I think charities have to fulfill that promise and to hopefully deliver and over-deliver on that and make real impact. Unfortunately, there may be situations where sometimes it's about having lots of activity, but if you're not making real impact, eventually it gets found out. And then that will erode trust. So across different contexts, I think the different level of promise and expectation versus performance, that's what will determine trust.
So it sounds like it's more like expectations are different.
Yes.
And of course, when you say trust, does it come at the expense of revenue, for instance? Is it one or the other? Maybe really you can take this, is trust expensive actually?
Yeah, so I still go back to culture, because I think that's so important when you say, is it going to be very different in different markets? Is it depending on which country you are from? I would say because when you look at the culture, it stands for what the company stands for. How do you kind of amplify it with very different leaders in different countries across different multiple roles as you kind of work in your respective countries or role? So the other one I think is so important is the performance measurement system, because I think that reinforces how do you rewards right behavior, right? And again, if you look at corporate, I don't think it's just for profit, because if I go back to what I give example when we talk about the purpose, let's say in Microsoft, we say, hey, we empower you and every organization to do more. We look at philosophy of empathy. It doesn't mean you have to do everything because you have to be profit-making. I think part of it, if you attract talents, when you look at the culture, you bring people that comes in to say, hey, I want to be part of it because I can contribute to the broader community. I'll give you an example, like we did work with MParts to build a fin finder, which is based on the mobile AI applications. And that is to work to look at illegal trade for sharks. And when it's kind of going through Singapore as a trading hub. And as it's kind of partners with the Singapore government, now it's being trialed in 28 countries. So that's just an illustration that tech for good may not be just, hey, I have to kind of monetize it, but in the process of it, the trust is being built to say, hey, there's a private sector and public sector that we are able to take AI as a technology to bring it to life. And we started in Singapore. Great that it kind of draw attention to say, hey, in terms of sustainability of wildlife, this is a fantastic example, right? And that's where it's able to get through to different countries for the application. Right. So I don't see it's an either and or. In fact, you attract talents that they feel when they come into work, they can also be part of the broader community that they can contribute in terms of their passion.
But some may argue that companies like Microsoft have that luxury of choice because you have the resources and the ability to have a community manager, who's not KPI driven in terms of numbers, For large companies, would you say that's fair, Perlin?
Well, I think it depends on the industry as well. I mean, I speak on behalf of the financial services industry, right? For us, trust is non-negotiable. I know it becomes a bit of a cliche saying that it's paramount and all that, but people entrust their monies with us, right? Our key responsibility is to make sure that we safeguard their funds, their confidence, and their financial well-being. And more so for us in insurance, right? My core business is really to protect lives and be there to pay claims when they need us to be there as they go through life's many different uncertainties and stages. So I think when you look at whether there is a trade-off between revenue and trust, especially in our industry, there is no trade-off. As far as we're concerned, in fact, we think it is interconnected. One leads to the other. And our products and services are all very long tail in nature. Our customers are with us for 25 years, 30 years or more. So when we look at revenue generation, we really look at it from a long-term perspective. And also, we are in a services industry. When customers trust you, they'll come back to you. There will be positive word of mouth. And you get repeat business, and it all then drives towards revenue generation in the long run anyways.
So in a way, you're investing in the future.
Yes,
you're investing in
and it's a
building the trust.
differentiator. trust is a differentiator in the brand.
Yeah, just like when you invest in advertising space with Mediacorp, then you can trust that your brand will then grow a bit further later on. I mean, it's just an example. Yes, Tony.
If I may just pitch in, I think we talk about whether trust is expensive. I think the lack of trust is even more expensive. I think when that's broken, Berlin talk about long term. I think that's going to be catastrophic, in terms of company survival. And what we have discovered also is quite interesting because the title says doing right. In our view, doing right, doing good, and doing well go together. So in the company of good work that we do, we try and think about the different stakeholders, right, that see what the company is doing and decide whether they want to interact with the company, they want to have a relationship with the company. So when you think about doing right, it's about doing right by your customers, doing right by your employees. And when you do good for the environment, for the society at large. And that helps you to do well, to create value and to deliver financial profit. So I think if you think long term, I think trust is so indispensable and it's worthwhile investing in building trust.
Just a reminder to send in your questions. In about 5 minutes, I'm going to take questions from Pigeonhole. So if you have questions, please put them there, and I will bring them to our panel. So what we're saying, in a way, trust is paramount. It's part of the foundation to have a good company succeed in the long term. Can we create this process? I mean, maybe Nick, you can take this. Is it like a financial transaction? I create a system such that it's hard to defraud it, to fake it. You almost build it into your company, that system of trust.
I think that's a good point. And I think an organization can create processes to make sure that services are delivered in a very trusted manner, and so that consumers can actually trust that on the reliability of the services. But as in all processes are owned by human beings, right? People take accountability for processes, and it's still back to the individual. And we strongly believe that at the end of the day, if the culture is not there, as what Willie put rightfully, the culture and the trust is not there within the peers, between the employee and the supervisor, between the senior management and the board, then whatever processes that's put in place that is governed by these people, there will still be challenges in terms of delivering that trust eventually on the long term. So the fundamental of it is focus on building that trust culture within the organization. And that's what Tony has also said. Building that trust is not only about conversations, communications, but it's giving the organization the greater purpose, giving the employees a greater purpose, that this company is not just here for profit. We're not here just to make money or drive revenues, but we're here to give back because we are given an opportunity to operate in Singapore and to give and sell that services to the people residing in Singapore. So what can the organization do to contribute back to the community? So you made the point that big companies have the resources, but I think smaller companies equally can do their part. And it takes, there are many creative and innovative ways to do it because in the context of our digital landscape today. So I'll give you an example. We are doing something with NVPC today on digital giving. But the digital giving, we mobilize our commuter base, everybody that carries a card, and encourage them to give in a micro level back to a good cause. So this can be done, and it doesn't require a lot of resources, but more technology to mobilize a larger base to do good. Another example is we do a lot of cards, EasyLink, very traditional. We use the cards in transport. We recently also worked with Club Rainbow for National Day to have a series of designs done by the children, so that children have an opportunity to showcase their design to hundreds of thousands of people on the cards itself. They feel proud, and every card sold, something goes back, to help them in their digital skills, for example, that we adopted with the Club Rainbow. So every organization has an opportunity. It's just how you do it.
So if there's a will, there's a way, Okay, I'm going to go to Pigeonhole now and take a few questions that some of you have sent in. There have been a few revolving around, sort of how do you build that environment in your company, that environment of trust, that environment where one is able to openly come and give feedback without being felt like they're being called a whistleblower, So how do you create that environment of trust, and how do you build it such that it's at a level where your staff can freely interact with you?
Maybe I share something that we do at Singlife. We've looked at various ways of really working hand in hand with our employees to create an environment where they feel entrusted, they feel enabled, and they feel that they are free to voice their different opinions without any fear or repercussions. I think especially for us, we are a young company. I think communication is very important, open, honest communication. Because we are on a growth journey, many times, it is important that we continuously let our staff and our team know exactly where we are in that journey. Whether we are ahead, whether we are behind, we also have to take the time to explain to our employees why we are making certain decisions, the context of why decisions are made the way they are made. If people don't know why they are doing what they are doing, where they are going, what purpose is it that they are going after, right? I think it makes for an environment of a lot of distrust, a lot of second guessing, and really a lot of misconceptions. So I think that first and foremost is very important. I think it's also important to let the staff know that we think of them and we're thinking about them and what we are doing for them. For example, because of escalating inflation, we made the decision, we talk about, whether trust is expensive, right? We made the decision, because we hear the difficulties that our staff are going through, we made the decision, even as a small company, to pay $800 as a one-off payment to all our staff in recognition of the difficulties that they are going through. But I think, on top of that, you have to operationalize an environment where every day, anytime, any day feedback is welcome up or down in a safe environment. We were just joking at the table that when we do pigeonhole, we will, in the company, we do not answer any questions that's anonymous, right? So if you want to ask a question, you have to name your name, because we do believe in taking accountability of feedback and creating the environment where all feedback is in a safe environment. So I hope that the questions coming through are not anonymous.
80% cannot use already. All anonymous. But here's again, a few more have come in. How do you know when you've arrived at that level of trust as a company? How do you know when you've arrived? And do you have a benchmark? What's your goal? Is it 100%, 80%? Is there a goal to work towards? How?
I'm not sure you'll ever arrive. But I think you can see whether you're making progress in the right direction. I feel like in building a culture of trust, some of the critical things to look out for are what I call moments of truth. Moments of truth, I mean, a person comes forward with a very controversial question or a difficult question, and how does the organization respond, right? If you respond with openness and humility, and willingness to accept the feedback and improve, I think that builds trust. In a situation of a corporate, say, crisis, will the company sort of try and minimize things, or will the company try and say, sweep things under the carpet, or confront the issue head on and take responsibility for it, even if it costs the company something? And I think those moments of truth are what will demonstrate in very tangible terms all the things that you put nicely on a poster on a website about culture and values, but the moments of truth will tell you whether this organization walks the talk and does what it means.
So Stephen, maybe I go back to your point, right? When it starts from the top, right? Back to what Tony mentioned, it's not about putting poster, looking good on corporate white side to say, please trust me, right? Trust has to be in action. Trust is going to be a journey, right? I would say success, there's not going to be a KPI to say, how do you measure trust? Is it going to be 100%, 50? Is very qualitative. I would say if it's really bottoms up, again, we talk about culture, right? If you start seeing how the employees are kind of doing this without the top telling you, I have to do certain thing, to me, that's a measure of success, which means it has been cascaded. People believe in it. They do see that it's not just a corporate statement. I am able to bring this to life myself. And that's where the openness comes in. And I just want to highlight to you when I mentioned about us doing not just for profit. In fact, those initiatives I mentioned to you, we don't have community people that do it. It's actually someone, like a sales team can do it. Because it's not about, hey, your achievement is about, are you achieving a quota? Are you kind of selling it to the customers? But I would say when people look at roles now, especially we talk about future of work, is beyond just financial business, especially you talk about corporate, is what is the satisfaction that I do the work, right? Am I contributing to in my circle of influence? So I think that's very important for corporate that, and the same for customers who want to work with you. They want to work with you not because every conversation you have to monetize. It's more of a broader conversation as do we have a common purpose? When you say you're trusted, can I believe you? And it takes action to demonstrate that. It's not going to be just tops down or statements, or you just ask your employee, please march along. And people just have to follow because you tell them to do it. I see the best success is if you can see the kind of employees doing with openness and collaboration. That's a great measurement of success.
Yeah. Steve, so just to add on Willie's point, quick one, right? Promise. So in this landscape, and we do have a lot of conversations about agility, about companies being more agile in the way they do things, the way they run their businesses. And with this agility comes a way of working. That means taking down silos, being more collaborative, sharing information more transparently across so that decision-making is faster, things are more efficiently done. Now, what we have experienced is also without trust at the core and center of it, to achieve this way of working is going to be very, very difficult. Without trust, we create silos, we create a blame culture. So trust will be very fundamental for any organization moving forward, especially in this very fast-changing landscape.
I just want to very quickly, because you mentioned that one question coming in also asks that sometimes some of the brands that we don't trust so much, in a sense, also still seem to make a lot of money. Why is that?
None of them on this panel, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess, you know, some organizations, maybe it's not in it for the long term, but it does seem like they continue to do well despite the way they work.
But I fail to see a brand that consumers do not trust. They may do it, benefit from it in the short term because maybe it's a very unique thing that they offer that nobody else can. But over time, I always believe that somebody else will be there, competition will be there, and consumers will naturally gravitate towards something they trust more.
Right.
I think it's common sense.
It's a once bitten, twice shy kind of thing. Yeah. I'm going to open it up to the floor. If any of you have a question, you want to raise your hand, we'll bring the microphone to you. We can take a few questions. Anybody? Just a quick glance. Otherwise, I will go back and continue to take questions from Pigeonhole. No one? No one at all? Okay. If you want to, just raise your hand. They'll bring a mic to you and they'll let me know. The top management may live out your values, but what about your middle managers and line managers who are the ones eroding trust? You can't control everyone in the company. You can't force people to act a certain way, right? Your culture may be of a certain way, but you can't make people do that. So what do you do?
I think just now I touched on it. In fact, the middle layer is actually so important, or rather, because the tops just, like I mentioned, set the tone. The execution is really the employee look towards the middle layer. That are you setting the role model? Do you really kind of walk the talk? I think it's important to walk the talk, right? Because people will gravitate to the leaders do that. And again, I go back to the performance measurement because I think that's very critical because that sets the system. How do you look at rewarding good behavior or bad behavior? And leaders, I think that's so critical because they represent how you take that board and the executive leadership and bring this and cascade it across the entire organization. So they are the very critical layer that's able to bring this to life because the board don't talk to the employees on the day-to-day. The communications happen daily at the middle layer.
Right. But any tips? Because that is the challenge, right? Many companies will have that large middle layer. How do you reach out to them and convince them to sort of get on the same boat?
So I think the communication is very important. I think the constant communications, rewarding, kind of bringing kind of best practices, calling them out where they have done good role modeling. I think it's so critical because people look at role models and say, hey, I want to be with, just like the leaders. I think the one I also want to add on back to your point is the employee sickness. right? Because when the employees give you feedback, on the contrary, when you say whistleblower, if you don't act, actually that's really detrimental, because then the employees won't speak up. Because what's the point of telling my leaders I have certain issues, but they don't act on it? So some of this sickness kind of help give you a needle where you are in the organization. So these are some good leading indicators to say, how have you been bringing this to life, right? Whether it's trust with employees, or you discuss about how do you really build the culture you say at the middle layer, management, versus what the corporation tells you have to do it. So these are all good leading indicators.
I think from my perspective, having as flat an organization as possible, right? Having as many people participate in decision making as possible, and always addressing the elephant in the room with as big a team as you can as possible, I think really does engender trust. Because if the truth is only held in the hands of, the hallowed few, right? It's very difficult to have it cascade down and people understand why certain decisions are made the way they are made, and it doesn't call for much trust in the organization nor the leadership.
If I may add, on this point about middle management, I wanted to circle back to the point about the shared purpose, the company's purpose, because I think this idea that we are all doing this together, with, of course, the tone being set at the top, but how it's cascaded through the entire organization, and everyone recognizing that they can be part of something meaningful and powerful. I think that's extremely empowering. I think this point also that we talk about middle management, many of them perhaps are the millennials. They're kind of coming through, they're in the early 40s, even the Gen Zs. I think that this is a generation that expects to find meaning and purpose at their work. And unless and until the organization shows that they are going for a purpose larger than just profits, but really integrating many of the things and wanting to be a force for good in society, I think we will not be able to empower that middle management. But once they are aligned to that purpose, once they are energized and enabled, I think you will release a lot of energy. And I think that whole notion of trust, because once they buy into that vision, to the purpose, to the mission, I think they can then transmit that down to the rest of the organization. So while the work begins right at the boardroom, I think it really needs to go down and really through the middle management, but via the way of purpose, articulating a clear purpose and aligning that, as really says, to metrics and so forth.
So it's a bit like brand loyalty. Once I buy into the brand, I believe what they're doing, I'm willing to stay with them. We've just got about 8 minutes left on the panel. So again, one last look around the room. Anybody have a question? Yeah, no? Okay, I'll just come back to this, because one of the questions here also has to do with the difference between trust and transparency. You've talked about transparency, right, to your staff, so they know what's going on. And at which point does it become difficult, because there are many sensitivities that often happen at different layers, right? So how do you determine how open to be and how transparent to be, at which point, what gives, what goes,
I think if you trust in your guys, right, and in the greater purpose, it is okay to tell them that this is confidential, that this is, for example, personnel decisions, right? Shareholder decisions that impacts. It is okay to tell them that I cannot share this openly. This is the reason why I cannot share this openly. And you have to trust that your guys understand why you can't, because it impacts a lot of things. Just because you are transparent and you want to be upfront doesn't mean, you give away state secrets, right? Because there are repercussions. And I think it is important that your guys understand what the repercussions are and why you cannot share.
I think transparency is so critical if you want to build trust. And having said that, doesn't mean leaders, we might have all the answers. And sometimes it's not saying just delivering good news or having bad news. I think employees or customers will appreciate when you are transparent about the good and the bad, because that's where they feel, actually, you build that trust because you're not hiding something. And in some case, I might not really know it, but you kind of share with them If I don't know, I would like to hear your concerns, and there might be a certain point I can share with you. I think this open communication is so critical, because to me, transparency is so critical if you want to build trust. Otherwise, people feel everything is so scripted. You're not being very authentic, when you are engaging with not just an employee or customers or any stakeholders you are dealing with.
But are there concerns that this could become a vulnerability? Because you are being so transparent, it's almost seen as perhaps a weakness?
I would say, but some, like I mentioned, we cannot say that. If you say it's confidential, I can't tell you now. I won't say it's weakness. It's more of you showing transparent on where are your boundaries, but not kind of hiding things. I still go back. I wouldn't say vulnerability in that sense. It's more transparency. Allow them to see what you stand for, what you truly don't know, what I know but I can't tell you because of really not at the face, but we could tell you at a different point of time. Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to come back to about two more questions from Pigeonhole, and this one has to do with a younger workforce. They're saying, how do you build that trust with your younger workforce, especially since they keep moving so frequently? So there have been a few questions on that. So they're almost not around long enough for you to establish that relationship. What do you do then?
So I take that lastly.
Sure.
So I think the younger workforce is generally different to our expectations, and the way they communicate, the way they expect you to work with them is totally different compared to the old days. And the best way we always saw to how we can deal with them or work effectively with them is, I agree with Willie, transparency, really. It's okay to say you don't know. It's okay to say, I can't tell you, but at the right time I will tell you, you have my assurance on that. And it is about listening to them and taking in their diverse views, their alternate views, right? In the old days, of course, if the boss says something, you better keep quiet and listen, yes, sir, right? In the new workforce, that is not acceptable.
There'll be a lot of why?
The new workforce wants to be heard. I have a voice, I want to contribute, and if you don't think it's right, please tell me so. And that's how we have to deal with the younger generation. Yeah.
So you're saying that the communication is different, the way the relationship has changed.
Very different.
Yeah, I think the thing about the promise and expectations, I feel like we have to engage the younger generation on their terms. I think sometimes we say you have to conform to our practices and standards, and that would be a mistake because they have certain aspirations, even the way that they engage is different. And maybe going back to the point about transparency, actually, the younger generation are very good at finding information. If you're going to be we're hiding that they can find the information elsewhere, they know more about this than you, we're in deep trouble, and that will break trust. So I think the line that I draw is that if it can get out there, let's be transparent, right? Because the younger generation will find it.
And it's so hard to hide anything these days, And stop starting your statement with, when I was your age, there's a dead giveaway. Okay, we've got to wrap things up, but I just want to get some parting words from each of my guests here. So, Huili, we'll start with you. If you could, share some nuggets to our guests here in terms of what we could do today, what you would do differently to reach out to your people right here and now, something you could do in the immediate future, in the next few weeks, next few days. What is something you think we could do to really apply and engage this culture of trust more in our organizations?
Because trust is foundation, I would say empower. Empowerment is so critical, right? Because that becomes like a demonstration. Are you bringing to action? Are you empowering me or are you micromanaging me? So you talk about the young people, especially. Empowerment is so critical because I think that's kind of a demonstration of I look at empowering you, but I look at more outcome-based of how I look at your performance versus do I look at activities? Do I have to look at, are you coming and showing up in your office working 10 hours, 12 hours? I think that empowerment, that people feel they have the freedom to drive the work-life balance, but be measured based on results and outcomes. I think that's so critical as you can engage the employees or, for the matter, the younger generations in terms of the thought process of working.
Nick?
Back to the three things. So first is consistency. Be consistent, do what you say, don't show preferential treatment, be consistent. Second thing, communications. We spoke a lot about it. I don't need to elaborate further. The third thing, create a safe space. Don't be encourage people to speak up, hear their alternate views, do not let people be penalized just because they give different thoughts or opposing ideas. Don't do that. This is 3 things.
Helen?
I think it's leading by example. I think in our business, there are good times and bad times, and many times we have to deliver good news, but also bad news. But I think the important thing is always to do that in a respectful way, in an honest way. If we are not able to give the entire truth to explain why, I think that is very important. And that's how you can build trust in people, when people know that you walk the talk and you mean what you say.
Tony?
Yeah, so for me, it really is about authenticity. I think when companies and organizations live out their purpose and their values inside out, when they're able to articulate that broader good that they bring to society, that aligns the vision, mission, values with the purpose, and then have it holistically and authentically and impactfully cascaded and implemented through the organization, I think that builds trust with internal stakeholders, with external stakeholders.
Ladies and gentlemen, please thank me. Oh, rather, please, you can thank me too. I think I'm pretty good. But please join me in thanking my panelists, Lee, Nicholas, Perlin, and Tony. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your insights with us. Thank you. I'll let you get off stage for a bit, because just before we let you go off for a short break, we do want to share with you a short CNA documentary that is just about to air soon. It's something titled Getting Real About Trust. Now, this documentary examines youth in Singapore to understand how they see trust among their generation, also explores ideas for how to sustain trust among Singaporean youth and their perception of it towards society and institutions. It aims to illustrate that trust is fragile yet powerful and intrinsically significant for the functioning of society. So this is an exclusive preview. It hasn't aired, it hasn't been seen anywhere else. Let's take a look.
How much trust people have in their societies, institutions, and governments varies from country to country, community to community. But what remains constant
We're sick and tired of it, and we're going to make a change.
Is the increasing scrutiny of an increasingly vocal young generation.
That you can be small and still be a giant.
I spoke to 8 Singaporean youths with different backgrounds and experiences to find out exactly what trust means to them.
I guess for me, trust is I trust that the person don't mean me any harm, but more than that, I trust that I'm emotionally safe with this person.
I don't see just trust. Welcome back to the YouTube and LinkedIn live stream of CNA Leadership Summit, Trust Matters. I'm Elizabeth Neo, your host for this segment, and we've just heard from Mr. Edwin Tong, Minister for Culture, Community and Youth, and Second Minister for Law, as well as our panelists from the first session. And Mr. Tong spoke about how the government can build on trust, build on the trust of society, and work closer with businesses, which includes media as well as NGOs, in order to strengthen our social fabric. Now, we've got plenty more coming up right here at the Ritz-Carlton, where we're broadcasting from, as well as in the ballroom right beside me. And before we move on to our next interview, allow me to just take a moment to thank our partners for this CNA Leadership Summit, Trust Matters. I'd like to thank a presenting partner, Sing Life, Impact Partner, a National Volunteer and Philanthropy Centre, with support from the Year of Celebrating Social Service Partners. Here's a look.
It all does come down to our purpose.
We have to get more holistic solutions through.
This is going to be the largest industrial revolution in human history.
When you are an innovator, you always go in front of the path.
Travelling patterns will continue to evolve, technologies will continue to emerge. It's that commitment and the purpose that drive the people along. Focusing on the people is top priority.
Integrity is what you do when no one is watching.
When you lift the community, your business gets lifted up.
We have to involve the entire industry ecosystem to improve the health, confidence, and well-being of the planet. And organizations like ours can really help them.
And so it helps us really, from a purpose perspective, support their growth and our growth.
And when we do that, the community benefits. And when the community benefits, the business will benefit.
There's a quiet behind every sound. There are voices that move underground, turning the tides and the wheels of our lives, without glory or praise to be found. Like the new moon that hides in the night, there are giants in it in plain sight, and their deeds will be seen, but they slip through the seams like invisible rays of the light. Can you see the strength at the joint, the glue in the fold, the roots of the tree, the heat and the cold? These are the giants unsung. Look to the good they have done. In the midst of our lives, they are leading the light. Giants, each and every one. Giants, each and every one. Sunshine in my pocket and it's flying all the way
Well, fresh off the panel discussion is our next guest. Let's have a chat with Mr. Nicholas Lee, CEO of EasyLink, for more on how businesses can get involved in building trust in society. Nicholas, it's good to have you on this afternoon. Let's talk about this finding by the Edelman Trust Barometer. It says that trust in NGOs and businesses has declined and continues to decline over the past 2 years. Why do you think that is so, and how events over the past few years, how do you think they have shaken trust?
Thanks, Liz, for having me, firstly. Well, it's unfortunate that trust has declined, but I personally believe it is also a result of other factors because of the way digitalization has rapidly increased since the last pandemic, and it causes business to actually transact more digitally through the internet, through mobile services. And with the sudden increase and rise of scams, impersonations, deepfakes that you see on social media, I think this has led to a perception or mistrust of certain businesses or perceived businesses that are providing such services online. And that may have influenced the trust barometer rating, in my view.
So how does the lack of trust affect businesses, and especially top bottom lines, which are things that are closely watched, right, in any company?
That's a very straightforward answer, because if you don't trust a brand, you won't buy it. You will probably buy a more trusted brand. So not only will it affect the business in terms of its overall revenue, but I think more importantly, if there's a lack of trust of the brand or organization, you will have a very uphill task of retaining good talent to run and operate the business, to bring the business for the next phase of growth. So it'll be a very tough time, I think, for such businesses.
But what's also tough is building trust, because while it is crucial, trust is very hard to earn at any stage of relationship. So in an increasingly polarized world, with so much economic uncertainty, what steps do you think are necessary, to build trust, and what barriers do you think businesses should be prepared for?
Well, I think firstly, trust is not a one-off thing. It is a living thing, and there's a continual need to nurture and harness and build trust every day, every moment, right, for any business itself. There are many ways that a business can actually continue to maintain the trust or continue to build that trust with its consumers and its business partners. And earlier on in the panel, I spoke about 3 main areas, which is the first point of consistency. Businesses must do what they say, right? Secondly, it's about open and honest communication. They should not try to hide things or sweep things under the carpet. They should be open and transparent with their customers or business partners about issues that may face, challenges that they may face, or even how they intend to progress or see moving into the future. And the third part is always a safe place or safe space for their employees and also their business partners, that they can give alternative views, can give other ideas without fear of a reprimand or being, blacklisted in that sense. So step by step with all these things, I think that trust can continue to be built. And the last and perhaps most important point here is that companies that operate and provide services to other businesses or even customers itself have to show that they operate and survive for a bigger purpose. And it could be a purpose of good. How are they giving back to the society, back to the community that they have actually benefited from a business standpoint? And that ties back to what NVPC is trying to do in terms of what is that bigger purpose that you exist, why, and how do you actually put that back into the community to give that little boost or that help or assistance back into our social compact.
Well, that was some interesting points you've made, especially how businesses and what businesses can do. Nicholas Lee, he's CEO of EasyLink, and talking about how those at the top can take lead in fostering culture of trust and collaboration in the company. Now let's take another look at another extract from CNA's new documentary, Getting Real About Trust, and we find out what trust means to youths from different walks of life.
Trust is the key to a united society, especially during difficult and uncertain times. But a recent study found that almost 6 out of 10 Singaporean youth believe that the social fabric which once held their country together has grown too weak to serve as a foundation for unity and common purpose.
So what are the things that divide us, Amalina?
The recent issues and conversation discourses around the LGBTQ community. And also I feel we're always on the fence or torn things with regards to foreigners, foreign workers or migrant workers. Things that pertain to us as Singapore citizens, say cost of living, say education, housing. These are actually things that unite us.
I think the issues that divide us are the ones that capture headlines and capture the media and all our attention. But there are a lot more things that unite us.
Where I think it divides us is when we define our identity. And so when we focus very much on defining what we are not and what we disagree with, that's where the conflict arises, because you are infringing on someone else's identity and you are preventing them from being who they fully are in society.
Well, next up, we have an interview with Tony So, CEO of the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Centre. Tony brings his perspective as a network builder of the business ecosystem. He'll talk to us about the role of corporations when it comes to trust. So, Tony, it's so good to have you this afternoon.
Thank you.
Let's talk about, companies often having to meet financial targets. And so how are their efforts in doing good affected during economic uncertainties? Maybe you could share with us what you've observed over recent years.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question. I think in recent years, yes, the need to still be profitable is there. I mean, especially in a crisis, now with high interest rates and a slowing economy, that's going to be very high on the priority list. But I think businesses also realize that they can't just look at the short term. They need to look at medium and long term. And part of that conversation is really about how do you build trust with your stakeholders over the long term, because beyond the immediate priority to be profitable, you want to make sure that your customers, your employees, your investors, the public at large still trust the company, because that will enable the company to continue to be successful and thrive for the long term. I think the question earlier on the panel was about, is trust expensive? And my view is actually, it's even more expensive to lose trust. So in building those relationships with the stakeholders, that's going to set the company up for future success. So while they need to deal with the revenue issues, the profit issues in the short term, I think the companies that are going to be successful will look at the medium and long term as well. And that involves building trust with stakeholders.
When it comes to building trust with stakeholders, the public community, it's found that there is a disparity in the amount of trust different social classes have in companies.
Yes.
Why do you think that is so? And what are some ways we can sort of reduce this disparity across various social classes?
Yeah, I think one possibility could be those in the higher socioeconomic levels perhaps have had more success, in their careers, been able to have more influence with companies, treated better in certain ways. So maybe it's not a surprise. But I think companies that are purpose-driven also begin to realize that they have a role to play. And there are companies like, for example, Sectoral, that is a clean tech company, that even as they invest in technology in the cleaning industry, they also make it a point to hire marginalized communities. So actually, that's actually one very good way for companies to be able to show that even as you progress and you grow, you want to really uplift communities. And when companies do that and do that very intentionally, not by the way, I think that helps to reduce that gap. And so that persons of all levels will find that the company is investing in them and taking care of them.
Actually, that brings me to my next point. Societal issues like income inequality, discrimination, the disparity between the rich and the poor. Do companies have the responsibility to address such societal issues? And I think there is an expectation for companies these days to do good.
Yes, indeed, yeah. And in fact, the idea of doing good is no longer just about donations and volunteering. Companies actually have the opportunity because they have very important assets, they have critical skills. And I think companies can really make a difference when they bring all of those resources to bear in dealing with societal issues. And if you think about it, for companies, the company can only succeed and thrive in the long term if the society is healthy and the planet does not get burned up. So there is the element of saying, if you want to continue to be around for the long term, companies have a responsibility because they're actually tending to the environment such that the environment continues to be conducive to support their growth. I think it's short term to say I do nothing for the broader society and hope that I can continue to be successful in the future.
Some wise words, and the responsibility falls on all of us to do something.
Indeed.
Well, Tony, thank you so much for your time and your insights. Tony So there, he is CEO of the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Centre. Now, a lot of our content today is about trust in businesses and within the workplace. So let's take a closer look at the roles that business leaders can play in this. Here's another of our news coverage. And we shine the light now on businesses. The survey finding that they are facing greater expectations and heightened risks. Well, yet more than 70% of Singaporean workers trust their employers. It's a slight 1 percentage point dip compared to the previous year. On a global scale, South Koreans score their employers the lowest and Indonesians the highest. Also, demand for the businesses to do good is high. The majority of Singaporeans expect their CEOs to take a public stand on issues like the treatment of employees, climate change, and discrimination. More than 60% of consumers in Singapore say they buy or advocate for brands based on their beliefs and values. Over 2/3 of employees also look for jobs that have a societal impact. Clara Lee finds out more about the range of causes that businesses champion here in Singapore.
Mattress maker King Coil Singapore believes in giving back to the community. The firm channels about 10% of its profits to scholarships for secondary school students. The money goes towards covering their school fees, for instance. It's also donated $30,000 to a welfare fund that provides uniforms and stationery for those who can't afford them. As part of its latest efforts, the company will be partnering organizations to help those with special needs by giving them a platform to interact with more people. Towards the end of the month, it will be holding its biannual sale at a shopping mall atrium, where it will designate a small space for them to sell handmade products such as pouches and keychains. The firm believes helping young Singaporeans can spark long-term social change and cultivate a culture of kindness.
I believe when they grown up, they will think back. They may also do their part, to the society, pay back to the society if they can. So I hope this is something that we can actually pass down to the different generations.
Small and medium-sized enterprises are also contributing to the community within their means. For one, this blinds retailer has donated some of its products to low-income households who don't have their own.
When we found out that they don't even have the basic curtain for their privacy, that's when we decided that, this is the least we can do because we have that capability, we are in this business, That's why we decided to help them.
The firm explains that such initiatives may help customers feel like their dollar goes a long way.
I think customers prefer to buy from companies that also serve a good cause. So probably when they spend their money, at the company, it also goes towards that same cause.
Looking ahead, the business is thinking of donating to even more people, such as orphanages and elderly care centres.
And while more women are running the world's biggest companies, the rise in representation has been accompanied by a fall in trust in female leaders. Data from the Reykjavik Index for Leadership, that's an annual survey that compares how men and women are viewed in terms of their suitability for positions of power, that showed trust in women leaders has fallen through the past year. And to find out if this complicates efforts to break the metaphorical glass ceiling at the workplace, we have Junie Fu, President of Singapore Council of Women's Organizations. Junie, it's good to have you on. First of all, is this true that, trust in female leaders has fallen, and especially in Singapore's context?
I think if you look at trust, it has evolved over time. And as more women go into different environments or into occupations that are traditionally not female-led, I think maybe it appears that it's more difficult to gain their trust if they were to be put as leaders. But trust is not a gendered thing. We shouldn't look at it through a gendered lens. I think both men and women have to win trust and gain trust. But somehow it appears that the females, especially culturally, and those who have not been in the traditionally gender-based kind of occupations, they tend to have to work much harder, right, to be recognized and to be affirmed.
Yeah, so on that point, for example, STEM is typically male-dominated career path. And also when you look at nursing, childcare, early childcare and early childhood education, those are more female-dominated roles. So, when it comes to trust, as we talked about, like people in those roles need to work doubly hard to
Yes, so conversely, if you are a male nurse, right, do you have to work doubly hard to win the trust, that you are able to care better for the seniors, for example? So it's a mindset change for everybody.
One point that you also brought up is that you said that the concept of trust has evolved.
Absolutely.
Also, the demands and the expectations from the public, from the community, that has evolved as well. Do you see that they expect greater transparency? They expect, these organizations to be worthy of their trust?
Yeah, because in the past, your word is your honor. Right, you can sign big contracts on a handshake, for example. And now we believe virtual relationships. We believe that when we pay, we get our goods, right, through the internet sales and everything. And that's why all the scams are so prevalent. And so it has evolved. And so I think in certain sectors, certain areas, I think trust, you really have to work hard at it.
So we talked about, trust and the importance of trust. What about, I think the important question is how to build trust.
How to build trust, wow. Okay, so it's really about delivering on your promises, I suppose, right? When you say you're going to do it, you do it. And it's about building that relationship. So it becomes a natural, and it's something that happens naturally. Yes.
So making good on your word.
Yes.
But what are some barriers that prevent that from, happening? Some disruptors, if I could say,
Yeah, well, I would say sometimes it's gender stereotypes, unfortunately, and definitely cultural mindsets and, very traditional points of view. So we have to open our minds.
Do you see this shifting in Singapore? Are people becoming more open-minded, slowly letting go of those biases? When we talk about women leading the charge, are they more receptive? Is that something that you're seeing?
I think when there are more role models, I think people will be able to see it as a natural progression for a lot of women. So yes, but we still need to work at it.
I also want to ask you about expectations that people have for people at the top. So, our leaders, business leaders expected to, lead the way in championing or, trying to address societal issues like inequality, climate change, even discrimination. Our businesses expect to take the role in that and not always rely on the government.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think it's a whole village concept, a whole society concept. We shouldn't just rely on the government. I think we should all, in our own accord, do our own little steps. Just every step counts.
Junie, I do appreciate your insights this afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Junie Fu there, she is president of the Singapore Council of Women's Organizations. And right now we want to talk about how technology and digitalization, which has become a huge part of our lives and improving the way we live, work and play, has also become sometimes a barrier to building trust. So let's take a look at how technology and digitalization can be used in a responsible way. Here's a video clip.
It's being pointed out that Singapore, as with other countries, must put a clear emphasis on safety and security as they invest in new digital technologies. Deputy Prime Minister Heng Swee Keat says that this is key in building trust. He was speaking to global leaders and industry chiefs at the Asia Tech X Singapore Summit.
In every technology revolution, there is a period of adjustment where users build their understanding of and confidence in these new technologies before they are more widely adopted. How far and how fast the new technologies diffuse depend on how much trust is reposed in them.
Mr. Heng cited the example of quantum computing, where very specific, complex tasks that would take quantum computers hours to solve will take traditional computers hundreds of years. But such tech introduces new security risks, and that's why Singapore is launching a network infrastructure to help businesses tap quantum-safe technologies.
Well, if you're just joining us, a very warm welcome to the CNA Leadership Summit, Trust Matters. We are streaming this live from the Ritz-Carlton in Singapore. I'm Elizabeth Neo, and I will be your host for the YouTube and LinkedIn segment of our event today. Furthering our discussion on how technology has become a huge part of our lives, including changing the way we work and how it can be used to build trust. I have with me Yan Lim. He's country leader for Singapore Marketplace, and he comes from Amazon. Good to have you on, Yan. Let's talk about how the pandemic, first of all, has changed the way people work. So for tech firms like Amazon, you guys, I'm sure you have hybrid working and all that. How does a company give and earn trust in such an environment where your staff not in the office all the time?
Thanks for having me, Elizabeth. So I think the first thing is Amazon as a company has always put engagement with our employees at the forefront. Even pre-pandemic, we've had a really strong culture of engaging and receiving feedback and using that data to build stronger trust with our teams. So for example, we have a tool that on a regular basis seeks that feedback on employees, whether it's on their workplace, how they're feeling, and across their ability to achieve their career goals. And in developing our return to office policies, we actually engage with them to arrive at the hybrid arrangement that we have today that enables us to create that environment where the officers were ready and our employees that could come back and really perform at the best way for them to achieve their career goals. And so far what we've seen is that employees have been really able to build and increase that level of trust, because that in-person interaction has actually enabled much more collaboration and much more trust amongst the teams as well as the leaders.
But give us some examples of some gaps that the pandemic has exposed. There's a lot of talk on how the employees, they have to trust that the company will ensure and protect their safety and their career progression. They may not be in the office, they may not be so visible all the time. And also employers have to trust that employees are doing their work, and they also want to contribute to the company, the organization. So what are some gaps or some observations that you guys had during the pandemic?
Yeah, so I think for us as a global company, we've always been able to entrust our employees. We believe that the success of our business and for serving our customers really depends on that trust and empowering employees to be able to achieve their goals and deliver on their career objectives. And that's really how we enable our teams to work across multiple geographies. And so it starts really with making sure that the scope, their roles, as well as their goals and ambitions are really accounted for and it's clear for them in the way they operate. Secondly, we also have a very strong culture of enabling our teams to work very closely with their managers and leaders, whether it's regular mechanisms for them to interact on a weekly basis, as well as regular check-in sessions for them to discuss their career goals and ambitions, in addition to providing the resources, tools, learning and development opportunities for them to actually go further and grow in their careers.
These are some tools to help the employees, as you talked about, go further in their career. What are some of the drivers of trust in the workplace besides having, open communication and that transparent way of doing things so that, everyone is always on the same page and know what management is thinking and stuff like that. So what are some drivers at Amazon?
So I think it's quite consistent. For example, when we heard the panel discussion earlier, it was good to actually hear some of the leaders talk about that authenticity in the communication, as well as leaders doing what they say. I think being really authentic means that when you have that feedback, you actually take it to your advantage and really put into effect what that means. So like we said, for example, when we came to the hybrid working environment, it was really down to the feedback we received from our teams that told us that they actually valued a lot of the in-person connection. And with the pandemic largely over now, I think we've been really encouraged to see how the teams have actually taken to that new working environment and have the ability to actually flexibly balance their own personal needs in this hybrid way, but as well as continue to connect with each of their colleagues in the office.
And Amazon is quite a customer-facing business. So how do you win the trust of your customers?
So I think when it comes to trust and customers, really what we need to make sure firstly is that for an e-commerce and store company like ours, customers need to be able to receive and get what they expect. In addition, the experience has to be someone that's really trustworthy, whether it's what they experience from buying through to the order and delivery that they receive. And for myself, as I look after the seller marketplace, which enables many of our small and medium businesses to succeed online, it also involves actually helping make sure that they are provided a trustworthy experience. So for example, we use technology in many ways to, for example, help with the seller identity verification, where we're now using facial recognition to help in that process. And we also make sure that we provide lots of fulfillment solutions, whether it's fulfillment by Amazon, where we can do everything end-to-end for the seller, or something like Amazon Easy Ship, if the seller wants to actually do that themselves. So we believe that the trustworthy experience for customers really starts by making sure that whole experience is trustworthy, but also that the selling partners and the products that they receive have been vetted and verified with support from Amazon.
Jan, it's so good to have you on and hearing about your experience at Amazon. Well, it's almost time to head back to the ballroom for the next part of our summit. That is a panel discussion on building trust with your customers, moderated by my colleague, Jill Newbrunner. Let's take you there now.
Hello, welcome back, everyone. I hope you all had a nice tea. We're going to proceed with the day's events. Panel discussion number 2. We're going to be talking about building trust with your customers. In fact, all your stakeholders. And I want to also say hi to everyone who's joining us around the world online right now. Nice to have you with us. Now, in today's business landscape, establishing a shared sense of purpose with customers and nurturing trust are both very crucial for companies. They can leverage the power of brands to promote social causes and support initiatives that resonate with your customers and, as I mentioned, all your stakeholders, in fact. Now, in the era heavily influenced by social media, building trust becomes challenging as online platforms can amplify societal divisions as well as polarize opinions. In times of crisis, it is trust that will be so severely tested. It often brings uncertainty and confusion, after all. So how can business leaders build, restore, and retain trust in an ever-polarizing world? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Jill Newbrunner. I'm your weekend host of shows like Singapore Tonight, Asia Tonight, and I'm also going to moderate the second panel. Now, again, as Steve told you earlier, if you wish to ask questions, there are 2 ways you can do this. 1, post your questions on Pigeonhole. The website is, as you can see, www.pigeonhole.at. Right to the screen on my right and on my left, the passcode CNA 2707. Second way you can ask your questions is a roving mic. Haven't seen a roving mic. Can you put your hands up? There you go, right at the back of the room. Roving mic, put up your hand. The gentleman will come to you on either side as well. Once you've asked your question, give the mic back to the gentleman, okay? Don't hold on to it because we need to get the next question as well. All right, so don't forget, put up your hand or pigeonhole your question. We will definitely try to get to those answers. Now, I'm not going to introduce the panel yet. I'm going to invite them on, and once we're comfortably seated, I shall introduce them. My panel.
They put me next.
Good. Thank you. All right. Well, nice that you all can come and join me today. Now, when people say, trust me, what's the instinct? The instinct is to be even more cautious, right? And to be even more on guard. It's not easy to build trust in a time of crisis. And as Steve mentioned, a defining crisis of our generation has been the COVID pandemic. After we came out of that, we were dumped into what? The war in Ukraine. And after that, a sputtering economy, and now we are all broiling under climate change. Not easy. But my panel here, they're not perturbed at all, and they're not daunted. In fact, they say that they have the key to building the kind of trust that's going to carry them through a period of crisis. Well, do they? Well, we're going to find out in the next 40 minutes or so. Very happy to first introduce Rhonda Wong. Now, she is the Group CEO of Oh My Home. Now, Oh My Home came about because this company wanted to provide the same level of service, the same quality of service to those of high-level income and low-level income as well. Now, Rhonda's company is also the first in Singapore to list on NASDAQ in 2023. Very tempting to call her the rose among the thorns, more apt to call her, as a gentleman may agree, the sharpest thorn among the thorns. Rhonda, welcome.
Thank you, Joe.
All right, we've got Paul over there. Now, before the likes of HP, there was Big Blue, IBM, and I was very thrilled to be reminded that they were the innovation behind the ATM machine, the floppy disk, the hard disk, also the barcode. It was all Big Blue, right? So in their 120-year history, IBM has seen off many a crises. So I'd like to welcome the General Manager, Asia Pacific, Paul Burton.
Thank you.
Right. And finally, I've got Chris Ong with me. Now, Chris, he is the Managing Director of DHL Express Singapore. Chris says there is opportunity in every crisis. And the secret sauce to his success is his own staff, his employees. So, Chris, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Let's start with you, Chris.
Sure.
As an opening statement for all three of you. When you think about crises present and potential, what keeps the head of DHL Express Singapore awake at night?
Well, I think what keeps me awake is not being able to pick up and deliver packages, right? And certainly, the COVID crisis was such an event. I mean, we are the world's most international company covering over 220 countries. Right, we've got 110,000 colleagues all around the world picking up and delivering every single day. Right? As we like to say at DHL, the world is 2/3 covered by water, the rest is covered by DHL. Right? So when borders were closing, when people were not able to move freely and planes stopped flying and packages were risk being left in our warehouses, that was a crisis. Yeah. And in fact, the thing that literally kept me up came on March 2020. If people remember, the MCO, Movement Control Order, between Malaysia and Singapore. We had 200 colleagues that crossed the border every single day that manages our South Asia hub, which is based here in Singapore. And the fact was, these colleagues, we had about 24 hours to respond with the border coming down. And as a result of that, we had to scramble and to say to our staff, will you stay with us in Singapore? We didn't know how long they were going to be here. But the fact was, we had to literally rush down to the hub, talk to those who were either coming to shift or getting off shift and saying, are you prepared to come back and stay with us? And they trusted us. We said, we'll take care of you. You don't worry about the roof over your head. Don't worry about your spending money. Just come and stay with us. Right? And they did. And as a result of that, we kept our big yellow machine moving. Yeah. Every single day. We didn't stop for a single day throughout the pandemic. They stayed with us for 2 years without going home. And as a result, we were able to build huge amounts of trust with our customers because we kept going. We were a lifeline to a lot of lives and livelihoods.
Indeed. And perhaps, Paul, to you, it's been said, or you have told me in our conversations, that the best way to tackle a crisis is to short-circuit denial. And I guess what you mean by that is to just admit that this is, in fact, a crisis. But on the other hand, you've said that the COVID pandemic was not a crisis for IBM. Explain why, and tell us, so what is a crisis for IBM?
Well, I think a crisis, you got to be specific about what you're talking about. A crisis is existential in nature. It strikes directly at the heart of the business. It brings into question whether the business can continue at all. And so when the pandemic hit, if you look at airlines, for example, airlines make money and they exist because they fly. But as business travel and other travel stopped or reduced dramatically during the pandemic, planes were grounded, they didn't fly. That was clearly existential for the airlines, but at the same time, it was foreseeable that the pandemic would end and the planes would start flying again. So the issue for the airlines was, could they survive? And of course, we know that governments help them survive. But a crisis that concerns me, that strikes at the heart of the business, is a crisis created by trust. A crisis created by trust. And in the technology business, the things that keep me awake at night are, and the two obvious issues for technology are AI and cyber. And so, we like AI to be transparent and open and trusted. And we want to know that when we develop AI, we can tell you how we developed the model. We can tell you how we curated the data. We can tell you what goes into building this model, and it's fair and it's robust. But it also has to be explainable. And what I mean by that is, if it's producing results that aren't based on the training data, then you can't trust that model. And so AI that gets released to businesses that's not ready, businesses that use AI with their clients when it's not ready, that creates a breach of trust. And that goes straight to the heart of the business.
Absolutely, and I am going to challenge you on that in a little while when we talk about AI, but I do want to bring Rhonda in as well. You are in an industry that is sometimes in the media when it comes to trust issues and reputational issues, perhaps it's a less than ethical agent or some opaque transactions. So in your line, what crisis keeps you in the property sector awake at night?
Well, Joe, you're absolutely on point that, in my industry, in the property sector, I live and thrive in a perpetual crisis. At Oh My Home, our core business and mission is to help you buy, sell, rent, and renovate your home safely, seamlessly, and flawlessly, so that you're not stressed out by unethical behavior, bad behavior. I mean, the different crises that we have to face, includes government change of regulations, introduction of additional buyer stamp duty, cooling measures, and so forth. But the one thing that really keeps me up at night is the thing is, how can a good company with good intentions like Oh My Home, how can we reach out? How can we help consumers not have the next bad, unethical transactions? There is a group of consumers who are aware that they were tricked by an agent, but there are also a big group of consumers who are not even aware that they were not receiving the best and most ethical service that is in their best interest. So it is really in our job, and the opportunity exists for Oh My Home to then, facing this impending crisis or this existential crisis, is that how can we then share about Oh My Home? How can we then let more people know that there is a better way to transact your property?
Well, thank you all for kicking us off. Now, we've talked about crisis. I want to talk about the next important word, and that's trust. And a few of us have already alluded to the Edelman Trust Barometer Survey 2023. As you know, 23 years in the making. They measure trust in 4 institutions, 4 pillars of institutions: government, business, NGO, and of course the media. Now, we want to focus on Singapore-specific statistics here. And the statistics tell us about Singapore trust in business in particular falling. So we've seen in 2021, it was 65%. In 2022, it fell to 64%. And in 2023, down further to 62%. Not a huge drop, but 2 things stand out. It is dropping. And the second thing is, businesses actually rated higher during the crisis of the pandemic than they are today. Why is that? Chris?
I'm not surprised, actually, because, in our own data, we saw that our customer satisfaction hit a peak in 2021, which is in line with the Edelman Trust Index. But what you didn't mention, Jill, was that the Trust Index in 2019 was even lower than what it is today. So the fact is, during the pandemic, overall, businesses saw an increase in trust up to 2021, and since then it has declined. And for us, I believe it is about expectations. So for us, for example, before the pandemic, we could ship anything in Asia overnight, right? So people expected that consistency of service. But during the pandemic, right, we had to take a little more time, maybe 2 days, sometimes even 3 days, because of border closures, capacity, and so on. But the fact that we could continue to deliver day after day in spite of borders closing actually raised customer satisfaction significantly. So the expectations are a bit different. Now, with the opening up of countries, with borders sort of smooth flowing and supply chains not as congested, we're back to delivering overnight. But people aren't satisfied with that already. The fact is, we're already doing better than we were doing in the pandemic. But the fact is, and we're back to where we were, perhaps during pre-COVID days, but their satisfaction is lower because they're expecting everything back to normal.
You agree, Paul?
I think so. I think the crisis was a rallying call for business, communities, government, all to come together and work for a common cause, and I think you saw that. I think everything went up in a positive way during the pandemic as people rallied around that cause. And so now with the pandemic subsiding, perhaps even over, or certainly out of our daily thoughts, are we regressing back to the mean? Are we going back to where we were before? It certainly feels that way. And so, but if you're going to compare government and business, they really have different stakeholders and they really approach different problems different ways. So maybe the comparison's not apropos, but I don't think fundamentally trust in business has changed from 5 years ago to today dramatically. But there are challenges ahead, to be sure, that we can probably get to.
Yeah, we will get to that in a minute, pretty soon, actually. Rhonda, next to you, I'm curious because we've talked before this. When the crisis hits, that's way too late to start building trust.
That's right.
And we've talked about trust being like a deposit that you really need to be putting into the bank today, now, peacetime, business as usual. You need to get that deposit in so that you can make that withdrawal when that crisis time comes. So I'm wondering, how is Oh My Home banking in that trust deposit today?
Oh, I mean, for sure, because when you talk about property transactions, this is the single largest asset in most people's lives and single most important decision, and usually the most important decision after a wedding. And the thing is that when it's something so important, they definitely need someone that they can trust or a company that they can trust. But the issue here and the challenge here is that the decision and discussion and coming to the point where a person say, okay, I've decided I'm going to sell my home. That decision-making process and research takes about 6 months. So how we are nurturing and banking on this trust and building up this trust deposit is that we provide the right guidance, we provide information. Oh My Home provides you evaluation so that you can accurately know information about your home, the current transactions, what you should price at, how much you can make an offer. We introduce a digital agent known as Homer AI, so that anything you need to know about your home, you have that instantly. You don't have to call anyone. So we built that out over the 6 months. And now the most difficult and tricky part happens is that when the customer has made up their mind that I'm going to buy, I'm going to sell, this moment of engaging an agent or a company happens in a very short time. This could be 0 to 10 days. And in this 0 to 10 days, you sure hope that the customer will choose you. So Oh My Home, over the past 6-7 years, we've transacted over 13,000 homes, and we have over 8,000 5-star reviews to build up this bank of trust so that at that 0 to 10 days, when you have to make that decision, we hope that you will say, yes, Oh My Home is the company I will choose.
That's very interesting. On this issue of building trust, Paul, you've likened trust to a cancer. And I'd love to hear that story in just a minute. But I also want to ask, is IBM trust-rich enough today? Is that trust robust? And I guess I want to make a distinction between two types of trust. For example, I trust your product. will do what it says it's going to do. I trust your service will deliver a package on time. I trust your data is accurate. Or that sticky kind of trust that is robust in a crisis, that when you get into trouble, when the company is in trouble and is in the crisis, and you say to your clients, to your stakeholders, trust me, that they will stick with you. Do you have that in IBM?
Well, first of all, don't ever take trust for granted, and you can never have enough trust. During the pandemic, I received pictures sent to me on my phone of IBMers sleeping in data centers, sleeping in their customers' data centers to make sure that they could provide support and keep their customers' servers up and running. I received photos of IBMers in parking lots with their laptops on cars working because they had to be socially distant or they couldn't get into certain facilities. So I think when you think of trust and you think of IBM and the experience that we try to provide for our clients, it's we're there, we're reliable, we're certain, we're committed to getting the job done, we're committed to delivering satisfaction to you. Now, we're human, so things happen, not everything's perfect, but you can never question our commitment. Our commitment is to be there when you need us, working, getting it done. And that's what the pictures told me as I received them on my phone.
Right.
And I used to talk about these, on staff calls and other things I did because it was a rallying call. It's really who we are. It's what we do. It's what you can count on when you work with IBM.
So you're not guaranteeing that you might come out unscathed, but you're guaranteeing to your stakeholders that you will show up, you will do your best.
We're there.
We're there.
Guaranteed.
Okay.
I would like to jump in on that. I mean, clearly in the service industry, you have to be consistent. And exactly like what was said during the last panel, consistency is critical. But for us, in order to get that consistency, our people need to be committed. They need to believe in the purpose. Our purpose is connecting people and improving lives.
Yeah.
And so as an organization during the pandemic, that really came to the fore. Right? People believed in what they were doing, right? Whether it was vaccines, whether it was critical components to keep machines running, people realized that what they did was more than just picking up and delivering a package. We were a lifeline.
Chris, there's a question that's come into Pigeonhole that I think you'd be perfect to answer, and that is, what are the key ingredients to building trust with customers in the age of, well, they've identified some crises here: scams, cybersecurity breaches, and scams. I know you have a story on that.
So, yeah, we were just talking about this. In 2019, I remember walking to my office one day, and I received a scam call claiming to be from DHL. My colleagues still remember this. And this was the early days of the scam. And I decided to actually take the phone call and started to understand the MO of these scammers. What exactly is it that, they wanted? And so we went through, you've got a package, you need to pay duties, give me your ID number as well as your credit card, and we'll get that paid and you can ship it through. Now, this conversation was all done in Mandarin. So I asked the question, this is DHL Singapore. Why are you speaking to me in Mandarin? And the scammer says, 因为我们是华文部门. That means we're the Chinese department. And I said, well, you know what? I don't think DHL Express Singapore has a Chinese department. And they asked the million-dollar question, how do you know DHL Express Singapore doesn't have a Chinese department? And I said, because I'm the managing director. Click. Right? And as a result of that, I got my security team and my IT team really thinking, what can we do? I mean, this is not something we can control. We can't stop the scammers. Right? But what we did do eventually was then to collaborate with the police. We actually came up with these cards, scam cards, one side DHL, one side the police. We actually then worked together to distribute this to all B2C consumers as we delivered their packages, right, over that period.
So that's double trust, huh?
Yeah. I mean, we used 2 trusted brands to go out to tell people how to look out for scams. Of course, we've got online presence and so on, but sometimes, it may not be so sustainable, but I think those cards made an impact.
I think what's critical is that an issue that could have escalated into a crisis was averted.
Yes.
Right? And that's where trust comes in. Can any of you think of an incident similar to that, where trust was the difference between what was an issue and an all-out annihilation of your reputation.
Yeah, Jill, speaking of scams, in the property industry, there's lots of scams. So we had this rise of scams in, landlords collecting deposits, and they're not real. Yeah. So tenants end up paying deposits to a unit that doesn't exist. So when we first heard about this scam, and then we started, analyzing our own Oh My Home platform, well, our customers susceptible to these scams, do they exist in our platform? So very quickly, what we did was we immediately implemented a SingPass digital identity verification. So if you're a homeowner and you wanted to list your property on Oh My Home for free of charge, you wanted to reach out to buyers or tenants, you have to verify via SingPass, because with SingPass, we will then know that you're the true homeowner. So in that way, any consumer who comes to our platform can know for sure that there is no scam available in this platform. So I think it's a very similar story to Chris in the sense that how can you help build back this trust and protect your customers? Because after earning all of this trust, the last thing you want it to be is not just the company losing the trust, but your consumers actually suffering.
Indeed. Now, I'm cognizant of the time. Moving on, maybe Paul, bring you in here. You've said in the past that nothing breeds trust more than success. Success is what really garners a lot of trust in what you do. I'm wondering, though, is that enough these days? And we touched a bit on the earlier panel, when people expect companies to be so much more, they expect them to have some kind of wider purpose, sort of like a purpose-led brand, have interests in community, things that interest the community, like the environment, inclusivity, diversity. What do you think?
Well, I think CEOs have tricky jobs these days, much more so than perhaps 50 years ago when Milton Friedman was saying what he said. But the idea now is, education levels across the board, across the world have been increasing consistently. And so with increased education comes increased social awareness, increased social participation, and sometimes that leads to political activism. And so CEOs really need to pay attention to that because their stakeholders are their employees, their stakeholders are their clients, their stakeholders are the government. And with such a heightened awareness of social issues, they have to speak, and they're expected to speak. And the Edelman survey bore this out. They're expected to speak on these social issues, but what if they don't align with their stakeholders? Then the corporation's punished. What if they align with some of their stakeholders? So it's a tricky job that they've got to navigate. But issues like the environment, inclusivity, economic opportunity, these are all big issues that companies have a role to play, and I think they play it most effectively in partnership with government. And so the idea now is CEOs just can't focus on the profit or on productivity. They need to focus on how they're contributing to communities.
Yeah.
And IBM, for example, we're educating thousands of people right across the way here in Batam in the Hybrid Cloud and AI Academy. We've gone public and said we're going to train 30 million people by 2030 on skills. We're going to be carbon free by 2030. Yeah. So we're doing a lot of things that are consistent with the values of our stakeholders in partnership with government. But I think values is really the key there, because if your values aren't aligned with your stakeholders or your values aren't aligned with your employees, and you don't talk about it, you're not transparent about it, and you don't show that you're making progress in pursuing those goals, then obviously you erode trust at some point, and it affects your ability to be, effective.
Well, that sort of ties in with Chitra, who sent in a pigeon question saying that CEOs are busy these days, which is what you said. You're juggling so many balls, 10 or more global challenges, according to a survey that Chitra has stated here. How do you build and maintain trust when everything's so unpredictable?
I think, for us, we live in an environment, at least for DHL, we operate in a very uncertain environment. Yeah. Because there could be, whether it's a pandemic, a natural disaster, like, a couple of years or more than a decade ago, there was this volcanic eruption that covered from Iceland, that blanketed the whole of Europe. Planes couldn't fly. There's so many things that could go wrong. But I do believe that if we have extremely engaged employees who trust the organization, what happens is they will find a way out, right? They will solve the issues for the customer. I think the job of the CEO is to make sure that you set the right values, make sure that people know what are the things that they can do, as long as it's within that framework of the values, then people are empowered to go and find a solution.
But sometimes this purpose-led corporate purpose, corporate-driven purposes like the environment, double-edged sword sometimes, right? Because we've all heard about companies that claim they are authentic in their sustainability, but then, have been bitten.
No, but that's because they're not walking the talk.
Right, because they've been accused of greenwashing.
No, because they're not walking the talk. I think I'm a very strong advocate that if a company and their leader is walking the talk, there won't be an issue. For us at DHL, for example, we've been talking about sustainability for more than 15 years. We've been checking our carbon footprint. We have been, moving ahead and so on. And I guess I talk a lot about sustainability. Yeah. So I have to be the first person to drive an EV, which I've been driving for almost 3 years. Right. So the fact is, if you're going to, be an advocate for that particular area, you've got to live out those values.
Well, social media, you can't hide anymore, can you? Just a quick question, because I'm seeing time is ticking down, but I did promise the AI question, and all of you use AI in some form or the other in your company, and you seem to use it as a case for trust. AI is a case for trust, to build trust within your company. But the fact is that the public is becoming increasingly suspicious of the role technology and AI is playing in their lives, whether it's AI biases or data and personal privacy concerns. Should we be relying so heavily on AI to build trust when it seems like it's a crisis waiting to happen?
I think for us, when we use AI to provide accurate information for property, no one would be skeptical of AI is doing bad things for us. I think in every avenue of solutions, there will always be some bad actors. But the way Oh My Home is using AI is to ensure that our customers, we talk about a lot of our customers are parents. By the time you put your kids to bed, you start looking at properties. We want you to have an answer that's accurate. We want you to have an answer when you have time for answers. And that's where our AI, our Homer AI, comes in to tell you about your property prices. So we see it as a benefit, we see it as a form of good. But if the customer says, no, I don't want AI, I want to talk to a human being, we have that.
Well, when things go wrong, I would think, they don't really care about your AI or your green. They just, when can I get my money back? Is my data safe? That's pretty much what drives in a crisis. Any thoughts, Paul?
I think AI is a problem if it's done badly. Everything's a problem if it's done badly. Mm-hmm. But for AI in particular, you have to be transparent. You have to be able to explain how you're building the model. You have to be, the results have to be explainable. When people get a result from a model or from artificial intelligence, it can't be arbitrary. It needs to be, with some reasonable effort, you need to be able to explain how you got that result. I think if you adhere to those two principles, then you can mitigate a lot of the trust deficit that you may start out with because people are just suspicious of it because it's a new technology. Yeah.
That's right. I would even add that, most of the time customers don't come to us saying that, hey, Rhonda, I want more technology. Customers, they want convenience. Customers want solutions. They want the job well done. They're not really interested to know the specifics of how your technology is being done. They just want to know, if I want to buy a home, if I want to sell a home, you have my best interest. If I want to renovate a home with Oh My Home, you deliver on time. So 100% of our delivery for renovation has been on time. And I think we're probably the only company in the country that does that. Mm-hmm. So customers are not then asking so how are you using technology? They just want to know, can you complete my home on time? That's it.
Yeah.
And last word to you, Chris.
Yeah, I think, having, two online sort of, companies, for us, we are both online, offline. We actually have to physically deliver packages. And what our experience has been is that AI works pretty well when things are stable. But in a crisis, our customers want to talk to somebody. And I give you an example. This was early 2022. I got a call on a Thursday night. And this lady said, Chris, you don't know me. I got your name from a friend. Could you please help me? My father is dying and my sister is trapped in Auckland. Her passport's expired. She can't fly back to Singapore. So essentially, we needed to get a document from Wellington to Auckland overnight. Or not even overnight, yeah, literally overnight. And it was already Thursday night in Singapore. It was, we had very, very little time. But the fact that we managed to get through, right, we arranged for that shipment to get picked up from Wellington, flown to Auckland. She managed to get that document by 5 p.m. on a Friday, get on a plane, arrive in Singapore Saturday morning, saw her father for the first time in 3 years alive, and the old gentleman passed away in the presence of the family 4 hours later. And, I'm not sure AI would make that decision to get that shipment to her within, a couple of hours.
Well, on that note, I really have to thank my panel because, you've really shown that it's not so much the crisis, but how you manage it, especially with that trust deposit being built up, that makes the difference between a storm and a teacup and something perhaps quite worse. So I do appreciate all of you and your thoughts and your stories from joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Well, today we have heard how trust is the cornerstone of effective governance and successful
Come to the
policy.
end of the CNA Leadership Summit right here on our YouTube and LinkedIn live stream as well. Do hope you had an insightful afternoon, and if you missed any bits or you'd like to rewatch the entire event, this will be broadcast on CNA TV on 4th and 5th of August, 9 to 10 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time. And you can also catch it on cna.asia/YouTube Live. And that's all from me, Elizabeth Neo. Thank you for tuning in.